Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is story about what if Naruto sneaks into Forbidden Library Part 1. Before I start, please do support for more amazing content and comments for Part 2. Do consider to subscribe my channel and share my video to your friends and check out the description as well. Let's start the video. Konoha, the village hidden in the leaves and arguably the strongest of the hidden villages, lay in shambles. Not at the ambitions of a rival nation, or the chaos of any internal conflict, but at the hand of nature itself, or rather an entity capable of such power and raw destruction that the wrath of nature would be the only suitable comparison. The nine-tailed demon fox, Kyubi, bared down upon the village. Every twitch of its tails cut the air, every step it took cracked the earth at its feet. Fangs the size of small houses shone in the moonlight as the beast tore through the village. Warriors, shinobi raced to meet the beast with the hope of slowing it down, perhaps even repelling it. Foolish as it was to challenge the strongest of the tailed beasts, this was their home, and they would defend it. Searing fire rained down upon the body of the beast, illuminating the village with their flames. The beast growled and swung its paws, swatting the offending shinobi like flies. Pillars of jagged earth rose from the rubble, impaling the demon's legs. It merely roared in annoyance, the force tossing all around it to the winds or into nearby debris. Arcs of lightning slammed into the beast's maw with the fury of gods. It merely belched a rain of crimson fire in return, consuming all in its path. Slaughter. This was not a fight. This was unquestionable slaughter, and the simple truth was Konoha would not survive. Not if this beast had anything to say about it. Minato, hurry, we can't take much more of this, whispered Sarutobi Hiruzen, garbed in his wartime combat armor, an adamant staff in hand. The god of shinobi could only watch as his village lay ruined at the hands of the raging demon. Leaping into the air, he summoned a giant shuriken and launched it at the Ninetales before flashing through Han Saiyan's shuriken shadow clone jutsu. One suddenly became 100 as the deadly storm of steel hit its mark and sliced into the Kyubi, who roared in fury at the sudden assault. Turning to meet and quickly end whatever dared attack it, the Kyubi was caught by surprise as its head was forced down. The cause, the staff resting in Sarutobi's arms. Even a being like the Kyubi had to feel the pain of a weapon as hard as diamond getting acquainted with its skull. If the situation were not so dire, the aged Kage might have felt some pride in forcing the strongest of the tailed beasts to bow, granted not of its own will, but he would take what he could get. That line of thought, however, was interrupted by a tail speedily making its way towards him. Only decades of combat experience allowed the god of shinobi to propel himself away in time to avoid becoming yet another casualty. I'm much too old for this. Fighting demons is a young man's game, the professor growled to himself, watching as the demon shook off his attack and refocused on the village. To his horror, however, it looked like the Ninetales had enough playing around. Jaws to the sky, all nearby shinobi and civilians were forced to stop as watch as slowly a black mass of dense chakra began to form in front of the beast. Those who could sense chakra fell to despair at the raw power radiating off the mass, and those who could only feel the ambient chakra felt their hairs stand on end at the sight. The air itself tasted of death as the mass stabilized, forming a sphere. The Kyubi moved to swallow the mass, the prelude to the signature and most destructive techniques available to the tailed beasts. The move that would signal the end of Konohagakure, or at least it would have. Summoning, food cart destroyer technique rang out through the air, accompanied by a billow of smoke, before to the shock and joy and of the people a toad slammed down upon the body of the Kyubi, interrupting it. Where am I? The booming voice of the toad rang out. Minato, where are you, and don't you dare tell me you summoned me on top of the fucking Kyubi no Kitsune. The toad hollered. Sorry Bunta, but it was out of my hands. Minato Namikaze, the fourth Hokage and Yellow Flash of the Leaf, hastily apologized. Bunta, I need you to keep it busy just for a bit while I have a plan, but I need some time to prepare, says Minato as he eyed the demon as it finally freed itself from underneath the toad boss. Why do we get the troublesome summoners? The toad boss grumbles but nodded, drawing the blade attached to his hip and hopping up to buy time for his summoner. I have to make this quick. Glancing down at the bundle nestled in the crook of his arm, the young Hokage couldn't help but smile at the small baby resting in his arms, his son. There is only one way to stop this beast, and only one way to ensure you'll have a trump card against what's to come. The thought gave the man some small measure of comfort. It was not every day one had to damn a child, their own child, no less, to the fate of carrying a tailed beast. Flashing through hand seals, the Minato Namikaze cast the last technique of his career as Hokage, and of his life. Sarutobi sighed as he looked over the reports in his office, retaking the mantle of Hokage after the untimely death of his successor. You had so much waiting for you, Minato, your students, your friends. The aged man glanced sadly towards the crib next to his desk. Your family, he whispered. Getting up, the aged Kage made his way towards the crib situated inside his office, taking in its babbling occupant with weary eyes. A baby with a small tuft of golden hair and sky-blue eyes and whiskered cheeks squirmed within, his innocent eyes greedily taking in all this new world had to offer. So active for one so young. I'm almost sure you'll be a troublemaker. It's in your blood after all. The old man allowed himself a chuckle, thinking back on a young redhead terrorizing the village with her pranks. Naruto Uzumaki Hiruzen muttered. He seemed to age the more he looked at the boy, a day-old orphan with a demon of raw hate and malice tucked away inside him. Life could be so unfair. He gently poked the boy's stomach, tracing the outline of the seal and earning him a cute burble from the child, lifting his spirits somewhat. With all the death, it was refreshing to see the brighter side of the world. A knock at the door broke the man's focus. The council is assembled, sir. They are ready for you. The soft voice of his secretary informed him. Giving a quick affirmative, the aged Kage gently scooped the baby boy into his arms. "Well, young one, let's not keep them waiting," he whispered. As he made his way towards the council chambers, the weary Kage could only hope the trust his successor had placed in the village proved worth his sacrifice. A nightmare. If you asked Naruto Uzumaki what he thought of Konoha, his first response would be, "It's a living nightmare." The general populace despised Naruto Uzumaki, and those few that did not outright hate the boy were either too wary of him to offer any real aid or ambivalent to his plight. Why the young blonde did not know. No other children were looked at the same way he was. No parents whisked their kids away when other children appeared. It was always him and him alone. He had tried hard to fit in, throwing on his biggest smile, dressing his best or at least the best he could afford to, and being as polite as a 5-year-old could be. But in the end, it meant little to people of Konoha. He sighed, staring at the 4 blank walls of his room. Other children had decorations or pictures they had drawn lining their walls. For a time he had them as well, pictures of him surrounded by friends, a few with what he thought his parents may have looked like. He took them down though, they only made the isolation feel worse. With a grunt, the young boy turned to face the window and stare into the night sky. Despite his bright traits, the boy had always felt at peace under the glow of the moon and stars, away from the glares and whispers and happy families. He got up and walked over to the window, taking in the village. Despite it all, he still thought the village itself was beautiful. The people much less so, but it was his home and on some level, he cared for it. He caught sight of a few jumping shadows, ninja, back from missions or setting out on tasks. He watched in awe as they jumped from rooftop to rooftop. Like most children, Naruto wanted nothing more than to be a ninja, and it was hard not to. The power, in the eyes of a child, was just amazing. "One day I'm going to be the greatest ninja in the world," he whispered to himself. Watching the last of the shadows fade from sight, the boy gave a nod to himself. He would become the greatest and the world would respect his name. Settling back into bed, he slowly drifted off to sleep, his promise quietly echoing in his head. The first day into his promise, the boy had hit a small snag in his plans. "I don't know the first thing about being a ninja," he cried out to himself. Oh sure, he knew they were sneaky and could jump high, but that couldn't be all there was to it, and even if that were true, he had no base to work with. Where did he even start? He racked his brain for a solution. He needed the basics at least. He couldn't reach his goals if he didn't understand what he needed to focus on. Naruto took a few breaths and calmed himself. Something he'd learned helped him relax when under the glares of adults, or the teasing of his fellow orphans. The punishments for acting out were much worse than dealing with a few cold looks or some jeering information. He needed a baseline to get him started, and the only place he could think of was Konoha's central library. He had never actually been there before. He'd passed by it plenty of times but never felt the need to enter it. The library was located near the center of the village, not too far from the market district. With his goal in mind, the young boy raced to the library, ignoring the usual looks the villagers sent his way. They weren't important at the moment. Finally arriving at his destination, he took a moment to stop and compose himself. He didn't know what kind of reception he would get here, and it wouldn't help to go in without thinking. Once he was sure he had cooled down enough, he slowly entered the building and was rather disappointed by how plain it was. Rows and rows of books stretched across the walls, but there was nothing spectacular about it. Walking further in, he found himself in front of a desk with a young woman facing away from him, stacking books onto a cart. Taking a moment to ready himself for whatever response he might receive, Naruto steadied himself with a small breath and coughed into his fist to get her attention. The woman gave a slight gasp, dropping the book in her hand onto the floor. Quietly cursing to herself, she quickly picked it and whirled around to the source of the noise. She was a rather plain woman, he noted to himself. She reminded him of the matrons at the orphanage. Plain black hair was done up in the popular Heim style, framed a similar pair of jet black eyes hidden behind a thin pair of black-rimmed glasses. Her thin lips stuck out in a pout, probably due to her surprise at his interruption. "Hello there?" Her soft voice cut his appraisal short, and he quickly brought his gaze back up to meet hers. Sorry." He cursed his inattention. He could see her quietly giggling to herself at his embarrassment, making it his turn to pout. Seeing this, the young woman managed to calm her laughter and addressed him once more. "Apologies. I did not mean to embarrass you." She bowed slightly towards him. Straightening herself out, she addressed him once more. "My name is Amagini Nara, current head of the Konoha Library." She finished, a hint of pride in her tone before looking to him for introductions. Naruto hesitated. Those who did not know him by appearance did know him by name, and very rarely did encounters remain friendly once his identity came up. He debated lying but shook that thought away. He would be here often if this went well, and he couldn't take the chance of his lie blowing up in his face later. Steeling himself and putting on his soon-to-be signature grin, he replied, "I'm Naruto Uzumaki, future badass ninja," he proclaimed. Amagi regarded the boy critically as he introduced himself with a grin so wide it forced his eyes closed. She knew exactly who he was. She was a Nara after all, librarian or not. She was also old enough to remember the attack and the 3 RD's decree regarding just what this boy truly was. The real question was, why was he here? She may have only recently inherited the head position, but she had frequented the library for years and had never seen the boy step foot inside the building. Focusing back on the child in front of her, she raised an eyebrow with a small smirk. "Oh really? Well then, what is a future badass ninja doing inside my library?" A rather direct question, she would admit, but in her defense, he was a young child. She doubted he would find her interest particularly suspicious. Naruto's grin seemed to grow even wider at her positive tone. He had been fully prepared for a scowl or even a threat, but this lady had proved him wrong. Snapping back to attention, Naruto looked back up to her with hopeful eyes. If she wasn't going to throw him out, maybe she would help him. I want to learn how to become a ninja and thought maybe I could find some stuff here that'll help. He rubbed the back of his head in slight embarrassment. Let it be known Naruto did not like asking for anything, either because of his own pride or the constant rejection he faced at the village's hand, forcing a higher level of independence upon him. Books on being a ninja. Amagi rubbed her chin in thought at his answer. They, of course, had books on the fundamentals of almost every shinobi art barring the more dangerous arts such as sealing, which required granted access by the Hokage or Jounin to be given to civilians or younger ninja. The real question was, should she help him or turn him away? She was not blinded by hate or anger. Kami no, she had a basic understanding of sealing arts, and knew the boy and the fox are separate entities, and to blame the boy would be both cruel and foolish. No, her reservation came in what he would do with knowledge, and with knowledge eventually power. A boy shunned for reasons he is not aware of being given access to skills designed to kill, at face value, was a recipe for disaster no one should even indulge. Her mind raced with possible outcomes. While he might not be the demon himself, could the fox perhaps influence him to aim his newfound skills against the populace? Should the seal fail, could the fox take over the boy's body and in turn gain access to the skills he had acquired? Sure, there were other ways he could acquire the information. The academy sprung to mind, but he would not qualify to enter for at least 2 years. 2 years he would spend ignorant and untrained. However, she also acknowledged that delaying his quest now could result in a similar problem. The boy denied the chance to chase his dreams. On top of being arguably the most disliked person in the village, would make him more susceptible to outside influence, be it a demon fox promising revenge or a foreign ninja offering the chance of a better life. Either option almost guaranteed a new threat to the village. She looked back down at the young boy, eyes filled with hope, determination, and excitement, but looking deeper revealed to her fear, sadness, and insecurity. Amagi has a choice to make: leave the boy alone, open to anyone willing to give the boy a modicum of attention, or help, leaving his and possibly the entire village's fate to the winds, or guide the boy, handing him the tools to become a trained killer but aiming them away from the village. Choice made. Walking out from behind the desk, Amagi rubbed the boy's head, inwardly noting the blush creeping along his face and the shocked look he tried to hide from her at the contact. Definitely the right choice. Come along, Naruto-kun, I believe we do have some texts on beginner-level shinobi exercises and techniques. Let's see if we can find what you are looking for. Yeah. She smiled down upon him, offering a small measure of support. Naruto would fondly remember that moment in the future, the first time someone had truly acknowledged him and the first time the problems in his life, just for a moment, seemed a bit smaller. Naruto sat quietly as Amagi seemed to glide from bookshelf to bookshelf, grabbing books as she went with an almost inhuman grace to her movement. He didn't think a librarian could move like that. He watched as she would open every book and briefly skim its contents before either putting in the growing pile she had set up for him or returning it to its proper place, shaking her head and moving on to the next shelf. Taking his attention away from her for the moment, Naruto inspected the collection of books she had picked and saw quite a few promising texts within the pile. Taijutsu 101, Ninjutsu for Dummies, and Beginner's Guide to Strategy among a few others. That should be enough for now, he heard her mutter. Amagi's voice shook him out of his thoughts and he looked up to find her standing beside him, admiring the rather sizable collection of scrolls, texts, and books. Amagi-san, isn't this a bit much? He questioned with a highly concerned look on his face. There were at least 10 books in this pile, not to mention the 4 scrolls he saw curled up next to them. He was eager to learn, but he had no clue how he was going to get through all these. Amagi laughed quietly at the look of dread on the boy's face at the prospect of all the reading he might have to do. She could appreciate a good book, but everyone had limits, especially children. You won't be reading all of these, Naruto-kun, she giggled. Not unless you want to, of course. Naruto quickly shook his head in negative. Thought so. She pulled up a chair and sat herself next to him. She looked once again at the pile. Truthfully, he would probably go through most of these books regardless, but she wanted to give him a chance to see what would be in store for him in the future. His curious gaze broke her out of her thoughts. If I don't need them all, why did you bring them out? He questioned. She smiled at him and replied, because Naruto, if you are going to be a good ninja, you need to find your focus. My focus? He tilted his head in confusion. Your focus. She reaffirmed, what shinobi arts are you going to specialize in? Naruto frowned. Can I specialize in everything? He wanted to be the best ninja, obviously. The best ninja was supposed to be good at everything, right? Amagi shook her head. If you could live forever, maybe you could, but you are only human, Naruto-kun, and you can only master so many things in a lifetime. Stray thoughts of the rumors surrounding a certain snake-like traitor crossed her mind before being quickly suppressed. There was no room to back down now. She had made her choice to help the boy. Comparing him to that monster served no purpose other than to feed her own fears. She could tell Naruto seemed unconvinced by his squinted eyes and determined pout. She might have found it cute if he wasn't being a bit stubborn. Naruto-kun, do you have a favorite Hokage? She asked him suddenly. The question took the boy by surprise, but he recovered quickly and answered. Yeah, the 4th Hokage was the best, he's my favorite. he proclaimed excitedly, bouncing a little in his seat thinking of his hero. What other Kage could claim to have single-handedly defeated the strongest tailed beast? To Naruto's limited knowledge, no one else, so that means the fourth was clearly the best. Amagi shook her head at the answer, but it was hardly surprising. Most of the younger generation looked up to the fourth, seeing as he was the most recent and arguably most notorious shinobi of his generation. Do you think he was good at everything? She questioned. Naruto, as expected, rapidly nodded his head in affirmative. Amagi bopped him gently on the head. Incorrect, she said. What do you mean? Wouldn't he have to be good at everything to be made Hokage? The young boy questioned softly, rubbing the spot where she tapped him. Amagi shook her head and clarified. Yes, she began. The fourth was indeed an extremely talented and intelligent shinobi. His skill was unquestionable, but he was not great at everything. She lectured. Oh yeah, what wasn't he good at then? He challenged, still not 100% convinced his idol could not excel at everything. The fourth is fittingly well known for 4 traits specifically. She held up 4 fingers for emphasis, the first being his intelligence, the second his natural speed, the third his talent at jutsu creation, and lastly his mastery of sealing arts. Seeing him following along, she smiled slightly at his willingness to learn, a rare thing to see in children so young. She moved to continue. I'm sure you noticed nowhere in that list did you hear me mention him having talent in any other ninja arts like genjutsu, kenjutsu, bukijutsu, or Iryo ninjutsu. She continued. The fourth was competent in some of these arts, but by no means was he a master of everything. She finished. Naruto sat thinking on her words. He supposed it made sense, but still, hearing your hero wasn't amazing at everything was slightly off-putting for a kid to hear. He supposed mastering everything was a bit too much to ask for in hindsight. Now the Amagi had explained it. Noticing his downtrodden expression, Amagi ruffled his hair again, once again earning a healthy blush from the boy, but no complaints at the gesture. Starved for positive physical attention, she mentally noted. She could only sigh at the walking disaster her village had created. The boy was putty in her hands, and he had met her this morning for Kami's sake. Shaking off those thoughts, she spoke up again. It's nothing to be upset about. After all, if the fourth became Hokage without mastering everything, then what is stopping you from becoming a strong ninja in a similar fashion? Naruto nodded his head, following her reasoning. Better to be a master of 3 skills than average at 5, and if the fourth could become a legend with only a few arts under his cloak, then so could he. Damn it. This revelation brought forth a question though. What would he focus on? He clearly wasn't aware of every single ninja art, so how could he choose, and what if he chose skills that didn't fit him? Seeing the boy in front of her frowning at this thought, Amagi decided to help him out a bit. She wouldn't tell him what to study, that was his choice and his alone, but she could guide him a little. Naruto-kun, she called out, bringing his attention back to her. Would you like some help in finding what suits you? Naruto nodded, grateful for any assistance his new friend, internally he hoped she was his friend, could offer. Reaching into the pile, Amagi pulled out 2 books and placed them before him. The first book was rather unremarkable in appearance, a bit worn, signifying either old age or frequent use, perhaps both, and a plain faded white hardcover. Beginner's Guide to the Ninja Arts by Sarutobi Hiruzen was printed along the cover in black text. Simple and to the point. The author sounded familiar to Naruto, but he put that thought away in the back of his mind and looked to the second book she had placed before him. The second book was much smaller than the first, and much more worn. Similar to the first book at first glance, it was unremarkable. It didn't even have any text on the cover nor an author, just a black covering that was faded in some spots with the passing of time. A short cough brought his attention back to his companion. Seeing that she had recaptured his gaze, Amagi clarified her selections. The first book is rather obvious. A rundown on almost all of the known shinobi talents and their uses. She decided not to mention it was missing the forbidden or banned arts. She didn't need the boy deciding he wanted to master forbidden jutsu after all. The second book, she grabbed the small black book in her hand and held it up, as an older copy of what's known as a bingo book. Bingo book? Naruto asked in confusion. A bingo book, she began to explain, is a book designed to make note of famous or rather infamous shinobi and kunoichi throughout the elemental nations, listing some of their skills, allegiances, known allies, pretty much anything that can be found out about them really. Naruto looked at the little book with much more interest now, but that still begged the question. Why was she giving him a bingo book? Seeing his confused expression, she sighed a bit to herself before explaining. The bingo book contains a list of ninja from all villages Naruto, not just Konoha. Every village has its own tricks and unique shinobi that tend to use different arts you might find interesting enough to pursue. She explained. She swore she could almost see an actual light bulb flicker on in his mind. Naruto had caught on to her meaning. Coming to the library showed him just how little he really knew about being a ninja. It was a bit embarrassing honestly, but at least he had a better idea now than when he first walked in. He swore he would make sure to be better informed from here on. Moving past his embarrassment, he glanced back down at the bingo book and replayed what Amagi had told him. If true, then he could learn about styles not even found in his village. He could be truly unique. Grinning, he turned back to face Amagi, newfound determination in his gaze. He was going to become the greatest ninja the village had ever seen. That was his promise of a lifetime. Seeing the light in his eyes, Amagi couldn't help but offer him a cheery smile. Looks like he's almost ready to start on his path, she thought to herself. She wondered where it would take him. Grabbing the 2 books as she stood, she addressed him once more. Naruto-kun, let's get these 2 books checked out for you. I'll store the rest away until you have need of them, she informed him. He nodded and moved to follow after her, taking care to put back a few of the scrolls he'd been glancing at while he was waiting for her. Making their way to the desk, Amagini noted down the 2 texts before handing them over to the boy in a small bag. I don't think I need to ask this, but you'll take good care of those books, won't you, Naruto-kun? She asked him, a gentle smile. Naruto was not the sharpest child, but he could have sworn he saw the nearby shadows twitching behind her. He rapidly nodded. How could she be so scary with a smile? Laughing quietly to herself, she rested her hand gently upon his head, running her fingers through the untamed but oddly soft mass of golden spikes. I'm putting my faith in you then. Don't let me down, she smiled down at him again, this one without any malice. Naruto looked down at the floor. Her words and gestures sent an unfamiliar but not unwelcome feeling through his chest. He wasn't sure what it was, but he reveled in it nonetheless, committing the warmth to memory. He met her eyes once more and gave the largest grin he could fit on his childish face and spoke. I won't. That's a promise, and Naruto Uzumaki never breaks a promise, he proclaimed. An honest ninja, huh? Amagini mused to herself. Not the most practical, she admitted, but couldn't shake the feeling this boy would be something great one day. Well then, get to it, Naruto, you still have a long way to go, and it's getting late. She gestured to the window to left, showing off the setting sun. Seeing the time, Naruto's face fell a bit. He had wanted to begin training today, but knew better than to wander alone at night through the village. It wasn't safe. At least not for him anyway. Shaking that thought away, he turned to face her and nodded again. Securing the bag and his new books in hand, he made his way towards the building's exit, stopping right before the doors. He turned to see his new friend one last time. Fond memories of their day together filling his mind. The first day in his entire life he didn't have to spend truly alone. He gave a megawatt grin and waved to her. His grin widened, seeing her return the gesture with a smirk and wave of her own. He decided he loved the library. Racing out, he cut through alleyways and secret paths he had found in his solo explorations of the village, arriving at his tiny apartment in record time. He was eager to start reading. After all, once he found a style that suited him, he could begin his training. Rushing into his room, he dove onto his bed and set out his new books in front of him. He took a moment to decide where he should start first before settling on the white book first. Probably better to actually understand all the arts before trying to make any real choices. Setting the book down in his lap, the young boy would spend the rest of the evening reading, taking small notes here and there when something caught his eye or he had questions to look back on during his future trips to visit the library. He'd fall asleep 2 hours later with a smile on his face and notes littering his bed. Naruto blearily took in his surroundings upon waking, slowly recalling the events of the previous day and his late-night reading binge. Perhaps staying up all night wasn't the smartest strategy. The joys of hindsight. He turned to his right, and thankfully it seems he had enough sense to neatly tuck his new books away before losing consciousness. Amagini's silent threat still lingered, and he didn't know what she would do if he had ruined them less than a day after letting him borrow them. Kami forbid he ever finds out. Just thinking about it made his body involuntarily shiver. Shaking off those worrying though, he gave a large yawn and with a quick stretch, he made his way out of bed and began his daily morning routine: wash up, brush teeth, and make ramen. Simple and efficient for a 5-year-old kid. Beginning his rituals, the boy couldn't help but go over what he'd learned during his reading last night. Having made it halfway through the first book, he had covered most of the more popular and quirky ninja arts included, and now had a fair grasp of the different techniques found throughout the continent. The book had spent the most time on the 3 most popular style of jutsu, being ninjutsu, taijutsu, and genjutsu, seeing as most ninjas' skill sets would include at least 2 of these 3 arts. Ninjutsu, as the book described it, was best suited for more destructive and ranged offensive fighting, though it was noted there were plenty of defensive ninjutsu as well, and one could become a walking fortress with the proper arsenal of techniques. Regarded as the most popular branch of jutsu for its inherently flashy nature and pure power, a ninjutsu specialist was not one to be underestimated. Taijutsu, the second most popular branch, encompassed hand-to-hand combat and the enhancement of the body. This branch, while listed as second in popularity, is arguably the most used branch, as close-quarter combat was simply an inevitability in the world of ninja. Simply put, everyone needed to know how to fight, and taijutsu masters were no less fearsome than their ninjutsu-wielding counterparts, maybe even more so. Lastly, genjutsu, the most obscure of the 3 major arts, but no less lethal in the right hands, was the art of illusions and misdirection. Used to distract and disorient enemies, genjutsu is a favorite among those who lack much physical power and instead opt for finesse to engage opponents, striking while they have their guard lowered or leading them into traps. Master of genjutsu are not popularly known, but who is to that isn't intentional given their natural affinity towards deception and hiding. Already he had a lot to consider, and that was just the major 3. The book covered many different styles and approaches, many of which he would never have even considered. Who even thought up fighting with human-sized puppets anyway? Suna, apparently, according to the book. That also brought him to another very important piece of information the book hard imparted upon him: the knowledge of the very life force of all living creatures. Chakra, a mix of physical and spiritual energy. It was the catalyst that enabled the use of most shinobi techniques and augmentation, on top of its arguably more important function, keeping its users alive. The book had stressed that chakra was not infinite, and if too much was used without the chance to recover, a user could very well die. Essentially, the reason all children weren't taught to breath fire at people was the chance of chakra exhaustion. That and giving a bunch of temperamental brats fire breath was an awful idea anyway. Moving on from his more morbid thoughts, Naruto returned to the question at hand. He still needed more information. Finishing up in the bathroom, he made his back into his bedroom and grabbed the 2 books, carrying them back to the kitchen where he could make breakfast and go over the second half of the guidebook. For once he was okay with the 3-minute wait on ramen. Just this one time though. While he waited, he skimmed through the second half of the book and found it was mostly comprised of bits of advice for the various branches of jutsu, and warnings for the more dangerous or obscure techniques. Essentially useless until he figured out exactly what he wanted to learn. Sighing to himself, he closed the book and pushed it away for the time being. He could come back to it later. Moving his attention to the second book, Naruto felt a bit of excitement come over him at the thought of viewing strong and famous shinobi from other countries. He wondered if any of them could compare to the fourth. Quickly, but carefully opening the book, the young blonde was immediately met with a picture of a rather unassuming brown-haired man who appeared to be in his mid-20s. He was garbed in a maroon long-sleeved shirt and baggy black pants. At his hip, Naruto could make out the handle of some form of a blade but couldn't tell exactly what kind from the picture alone. Around his neck rested a headband with the symbol of what appeared to be rocks etched onto a metal plate. Beneath the photo, an overview offered some more insight. Name: Akashi Ginza. Alias: The Iron Ninja. Age: 25. Affiliation: Iwakugure. Rank: Chunin. Status: Alive. Info: extremely proficient in Iwakugure's signature enhancement technique, Iron Shell, that hardens the user's skin equal to the amount of chakra used. Ginza has built a reputation as one of the village's most sturdy ninja, being near impervious to traditional weaponry and taijutsu. Average in earth-style ninjutsu and taijutsu, and slightly above average in kenjutsu. Ginza focuses more on outlasting his opponents than outmaneuvering them. Threat level: high C rank to low B rank. Naruto made a mental note to thank Amagini for suggesting this book. 1 page in and he was already hooked. This guy was no Yellow Flash, sure, but the idea of being almost immune to damage was still pretty cool in his eyes. He also made note of his skills: earth ninjutsu and kenjutsu. The guide mentioned chakra could take the form of 5 primary elements, those being earth, water, fire, wind, and lightning respectively, each having a weakness and strength against one of the other elements, creating a sort of balance. Maybe elemental ninjutsu was his calling? He would have to find out more though. He doubted it would be as easy as picking an element and flinging it around as he pleased. He could hope though. His thoughts were interrupted by the smell of his ramen snapping him out of his daydream. He quickly closed the book, piling it quickly on top of the other one before grabbing his cup ramen and making short work of his salty breakfast. Quick, cheap, and tasty, what else could he ask for? Finishing his breakfast in typical Uzumaki fashion, inhaling it, Naruto decided he needed to take a break. He had spent all night and most of his morning reading. His body demanded exercise. Gathering his outfit consisting of a pair of black shorts, a white shirt with an orange spiral on the back, and finished off with a pair of blue sandals, he quickly changed and made his way out the house. Deciding against heading further into the village, he made his way towards the outskirts of the village instead, in the direction the outer training grounds. Konoha had 2 types of training grounds, the first being those found within the village, used generally by academy students and genin for safety and oversight. The second being larger ones located outside the village that were bigger but didn't offer the safety of Konoha's walls. These were used by Chunin level ninja and up. Obviously, he knew he didn't belong to either category, but the guards generally didn't bother stopping him from walking out. He wouldn't put it past them to be hoping for a stray animal to attack him or something. Frowning at the thought, he shook his head and sped up. He was not going to think about that for now. As expected, the guards barely spared him a passing glance before returning to their duties as he walked through the checkpoint leading to the training grounds. At least being ignored had some perks to it. Naruto slowed as the village gates shrunk behind him, hidden by the towering trees that concealed the village and give it its namesake. He truly enjoyed being out in nature. He was still alone, yes, but it lacked the malice that seemed to follow him when he traveled throughout the village, instead replaced with peaceful silence. Yuthu wahyuth! An excitable shout rang out through the forest. Okay, maybe not so peaceful today. Sprinting to where he heard the shout, he came across 2 figures standing in the middle of an empty training ground. They seemed not to notice him, hidden within a bush by the edge of the grounds, too engrossed with their own conversation. The first figure was a bit shorter than the second, standing around 5'9". Through the more interesting features were his spiked silver hair standing defiantly in the face of gravity, his headband that covered his left eye, and a face mask that covered his mouth and nose, leaving only his right eye visible, giving him a scarecrow-like appearance. Other than that, he seemed rather plain, garbed in the standard green shinobi vest with a black long-sleeved shirt and somewhat baggy black pants and sandals. The second figure, however, made the first look completely normal. Standing at around 6 foot tall, the second figure was dressed head to toe in a green skin-tight jumpsuit with a green vest and orange leg warmers. The oddity didn't stop there. The bowl cut and bushy eyebrows made for one of the strangest sights Naruto had ever seen. Were those things even real? He wondered, staring at the man's giant and rather animated eyebrows. He was brought out of his musings by another shout from the larger man. My eternal rival, I challenge you to a contest to fan the flames of our youth, the man exclaimed, offering a thumbs up and a grin to his companion. The shorter figure was silent for a few minutes, simply staring off into the tree line for a moment before replying in a much less enthused manner. Did you say something, guy? The man asked, pulling out a little orange book from a pouch on his hip. Gah! You and your hip attitude won't get the best of me today, Kakashi. I'm here to even the score, and as the one behind I get to choose the challenge. The man pointed dramatically at the now identified Kakashi. Kakashi sighed while flipping a page of his book. Alright guy, name your challenge. He muttered, hoping to get this over with quickly and go back to reading in peace. Guy's eyes quickly darted in the direction of their hidden audience member, though he knew Kakashi was well aware of the boy's presence. The amount of latent chakra inside him wasn't hard to spot even by non-sensor Nin. Guy returned his gaze to his rival, giving off a dazzling smile before issuing his challenge. A simple spar, old friend, no better way to get our blood pumping than a good fight. Kakashi didn't outwardly react to his comrade's exuberance, but inside he truly wanted to be anywhere but here. Was it so much to want to just read and enjoy his day off? Apparently yes. Putting his book away, he nodded towards Guy. What are the rules of this bout, Guy? He could try and run, but Guy would find him sooner or later. That, and if he left, he wasn't sure what Guy would do to the kid hiding in the bushes, but it wouldn't be fair to leave him to that fate. In his hiding spot, Naruto couldn't believe his luck. He was going to watch two ninja spar for the first time. Shinobi were by nature a secretive bunch, so it was rare to see them show off any of their skill without either attacking one or being one yourself. This was a rare chance to see some action up close, and he was going to make the most of it. At his rival's acknowledgement, Guy seemed to get even more excited, if that was even possible, before quickly laying out the terms of their duel. Only taijutsu and low-rank ninjutsu are allowed. No genjutsu or throwing weapons are permitted, Guy stated, laying out the rules of engagement. Essentially nothing that could go wrong and get their audience member harmed, but still allowed them to put on a little show. It also helped that it gave Guy an advantage that he could abuse. It seemed Kakashi picked up on that last tidbit, and seemed to resign himself to being Guy's training post for a bit. He wasn't weak by any means, but Guy redefined what it meant to master hand-to-hand combat. Nodding his head in confirmation of the rules, he quickly jumped back, making space to prepare, his body tensing, ready to react to the slightest movement and respond in full to any aggression. Guy grinned and fell into his usual combat stance, legs parted and arms bent tucked to his side. If it wasn't for his ridiculous outfit, he may have looked somewhat intimidating due to his size alone. For a moment the two simply stared at one another, sizing each other up but making no move to engage. From his position in the bushes, Naruto could feel his hairs stand on end in suspense, his breath caught in his chest, waiting to see who would make the first move. He didn't have to wait long. Guy sprung into action suddenly, crossing the distance between him and his opponent in seconds and appearing before him. Left arm cocked back for a direct punch to Kakashi's torso. Kakashi, having fought Guy many times before, was able to predict the incoming assault and spun on his heel, back facing Guy's and crouching as he did so, allowing the offending fist to sail overhead before reaching out and grabbing Guy's arm, using the forward momentum to throw him over his shoulder. Guy, however, wasn't a taijutsu expert for nothing and quickly righted himself mid-flight and landing on his feet for a brief moment before he was once again upon his opponent in a burst of speed. If he couldn't put him down with pure power, then he'd overwhelm his rival under a barrage. Launching a series of quick punches, kicks, and jabs, Guy made sure to leave no room for Kakashi to breathe under his rapid assault and forced him back closer to the center of the clearing. Kakashi grit his teeth in annoyance under his mask. This fight was firmly in Guy's favor, and if this kept up, things they would be tied soon, and that meant even more challenges. He refused to allow it. Seeing an opening in Guy's attack, he quickly dodged under a jab, making its way towards his face before kicking Guy in the stomach, forcing him to pause slightly in his attack, creating the gap needed for Kakashi to jump back once again, creating some distance. He wasn't idle during his backward flight through. Flashing through hand signs in midair, he brought his fingers up to his masked mouth, calling out the name of his jutsu, fire style. Great fireball technique. Naruto watched in awe as a large ball of red and orange flames appeared in front of the masked ninja before sailing towards Guy's position, ready to consume anything and everything in its path. It detonated immediately on contact with the ground, sending heated air rushing outwards from the explosion and charring the land around the impact site. Shielding his eyes from the gust of heated air, Naruto quickly turned to see what had become of the green-clad shinobi who'd apparently just taken a fireball head-on. Was he okay? Among the leftover flames and charred rocks, he could not find a body, just ash, grass, and a burning log. Did Guy escape? Dynamic entry. A booming and familiar voice cried out from behind Kakashi, drawing Naruto's attention back in the other direction. Kakashi wasn't surprised. That hadn't put Guy down, and he had been ready for a retaliatory strike. Hearing one of Guy's signature techniques incoming, he quickly spun around once more, this time bringing both his arms up as he braced himself, and soon felt the familiar and highly unpleasant sensation of Guy's foot smashing against his raised arms and sending him skidding across the training ground, leaving them once again face to face. Taking a moment to inspect one another, Kakashi noted Guy's outfit had a bit of soot on it, and he could see light burn marks from the heat of the explosion. It seems his attack hadn't completely been avoided, but he knew it wasn't enough to actually stop him by any means. Guy looked over Kakashi. Barring some scuff marks, he appeared outwardly fine, but he could see the silver-haired ninja's arms lightly shaking a bit from his surprise attack. His rival hadn't reacted in time and was forced to take the attack head on, his hidden weights adding to the power of the kick. Naruto was watching all this with bated breath. Truthfully, he knew either opponent was giving their all in this match, but he didn't care. The skill on display was enough to make this whole outing worth it in his eyes. He knew he had made the right choice coming out here this morning. Refocusing on the two ninjas in front of him, he prepared himself for the next clash. Guy, Kakashi called out, how about we end this in one final move, yeah? Oh. Are you finally fired up, Kakashi? Are you feeling the springtime of youth? Guy replied, hyping himself up. Sure, something like that, Kakashi mumbled to himself before continuing, so? What do you say, one last move? Guy nodded, falling back into his stance, ready to end their spar in one last move. Kakashi smiled under his mask. Perfect. Well then, come at me. Kakashi made no efforts to move, watching as Guy quickly began to close the gap between them once more. He could see Guy's right arm tense in preparation for a devastating punch as he came closer and closer. Guy leaped at the last moment, spinning sideways in midair, adding an extra burst of momentum and power behind his punch before launching his fist right at Kakashi's relaxed face. Wait, relaxed? Guy didn't have the time to ponder this, as his vision was soon consumed, filled with white smoke as his fist made contact with his rival's face. Or at least what he thought was his face, his fist stopping momentarily before continuing along its path, eventually striking the ground, shattering it under the force of impact. A clone. He had hit a clone. Kakashi, how unyouthful, come back here. Guy roared into the sky before bounding off in the direction of the village. He would not be denied the chance to even the score and prove the power of his youth. Naruto watched as the man screamed and sprinted off towards the village, his eyes barely managing to follow as he disappeared into the canopy of the trees. He could still hear the cries of youth echoing faintly through the forest. Finally exiting the bush now that he was alone and reflected on what he just witnessed, a small glimpse into the shinobi world. Eyes scanning over the scorched grass and shattered earth, he marveled at the destruction, and they hadn't even gone all out. Giddy with excitement, Naruto began the trip home, passion renewed as he imagined himself launching fireballs or cracking the ground with his bare hands. He needed to start training soon. Naruto sprinted through the village, swerving past any villagers and merchants in his path with practiced ease, ducking under the various stands that littered the streets, hawking their wares to passers-by. The village was up and about by now, being close to noon, and the civilians could be seen going about their daily routines, either running shops or talking amongst themselves about business and the latest gossip. It made for a picturesque scene of peace, a far cry from the rather savage history of conflict that had ravaged the continent in ages past. However, for Naruto, the ongoings to the village were far from his mind. He was too distracted to even notice the sneering faces of a few civilians as he ran towards his destination, the Konoha Central Library. He wanted to talk with Amagini about he'd seen. He bet she would be super impressed by his recount of the fight he just witnessed. Fireballs flying, ninja teleporting, creating a small crater with just a single punch. Who wouldn't want to hear about that? It helped that she was his first and only real friend. He had decided someone who was so nice to him had to at least like him enough for that. Also, he wouldn't mind experiencing that warm, tingly feeling he had when he was with her. Not that he would ever say so. Grinning at his thought, he didn't notice a figure step into his path until he barreled right into them, ripping him from his thoughts and sending him sprawling onto the ground. Ow, he moaned to himself, rubbing his head in an attempt to soothe the stinging sensation from the collision. Serves you right, brat. Watch where you are running next time. A gruff but distinctly female voice admonished him. Naruto looked up at the offending brick wall he'd run into. At least that was it had felt like when he crashed into them, and was surprised by what he saw. She was the prettiest brick wall he'd ever seen. Purple hair, done up in a single spiked ponytail, crowned her head, immediately catching his attention with its exotic coloration and style. Trailing down, he met her gaze and noted she had honey-colored eyes that were narrowed in what he guessed was irritation at his actions. Below that, however, really caught the boy's eye. She was barely dressed, covered in little more than fishnet, and a long, open trench coat. Face flushed, he quickly rose his head to look back up at her increasing irate face. Looks like he may have been staring a bit too long. I am sorry. It was an accident. I didn't mean to run into you, miss, I swear. He quickly scrambled to his feet and apologized, bowing low to show proper respect to the offended party. He had learned that it better was for him to take the blame and beg for forgiveness than try and fight. He'd figured that out the hard way the first time. Humph, whatever, just watch where you're going next time, brat. You're lucky I'm in a good mood, so I'll let you off with a warning. The purple-haired woman said, her face shifting from irritation to indifference, accepting the boy's apology. He seemed scared enough without her adding to it. Besides, she was a grown woman, there was no fun in picking on a kid anyway. Dusting her leg off, she quickly turned heel and began her trek to her prior destination. Business concluded. Naruto watched the purple-haired woman begin to walk away, inwardly breathing a sigh of relief that she had let the matter go despite how scary she seemed at first, and he was content to leave it at that, and bolt as far away as possible from here in case she changed her mind. Before he could, though, he recalled something about her appearance, specifically an object wrapped around her head, a headband engraved with a leaf symbol signifying her allegiance to Konoha. So she wasn't just a scary lady, she was a trained scary lady. Wonderful. With that thought, Naruto felt even more confident that getting far away was the best course of action at that moment, but a small part of him wanted to push his luck. Maybe, if he played his cards right, she could help him. Taking a deep breath, he composed himself before calling out to her. Hey, lady! He hollered after her, and felt a small pang of happiness when she stopped. He hadn't been outright ignored. That was good, right? The look on her face as she turned around made him reconsider that viewpoint very quickly. Didn't I just say you could go? She questioned, her eyes once again narrowed at the blonde holding her up. She had places to be and people to see. Well, more like people to maim and torture, but who cared about the little details? Swallowing the lump in his throat at her glare, he straightened himself, pushed onward. This was for his dream, he couldn't afford to falter. Why, you're a ninja, right? He asked, gazing once again at the headband hidden away under stray locks of her purple hair. I wear the headband, brat, so obviously I am. Now what do you want, kid? She wasn't the most patient woman by any means, and if he didn't have a good reason to be bothering her, she'd teach him to respect people's time with a little game of tag. Flinching slightly at her tone but not deterred, he pressed on, ignoring his growing concern. This may have been the wrong person to pester. He couldn't afford to back out now, though he had a feeling that would end worse than simply asking his questions. Doing his best to hide his growing fear, Naruto once again bowed and asked in the strongest voice a terrified 5-year-old could muster. Please, lady, help me become a great shinobi. He half asked, half shouted, eyes closed in trepidation awaiting her answer. No. Her answer was quick, blunt and to the point. She wanted nothing to do with playing babysitter for a brat who had no clue what he was really asking. Naruto's eyes flew open at her dismissal, his earlier fear replaced with shock at her casual disregard of his request. She hadn't even considered it for a moment. Why not? He cried indignantly. He didn't think he was asking for that much. The purple-haired kunoichi rubbed the bridge of her nose and let out a sigh of irritation before glaring once more down on the blonde pest. Look, kid, I'm not interested in taking on any snot-nosed brats as an apprentice or anything. If you want training, go join the academy, it's kinda their job, she said. Naruto's face fell from anger to confusion at her words. He hadn't even asked to be her apprentice, had he? Thinking back on his words, his eyes widened slightly in understanding. She misunderstood his request. Wait. Lady, I don't want to be your apprentice, I just need some information, he said quickly, trying to convince her before she just decided to leave. Firstly, my name is Anko, not Lady Brat. She damn sure wasn't a lady. No proper lady could stomach what she did, that's for sure. Secondly, do I look like I library to you? If you have questions, go there. His persistence was admirable but was quickly becoming an annoyance. The boy pouted and for the first time sent her a glare of his own. It was cute, more so than scary, but she gave him props for having the guts to do it, given he was shaking like a leaf at the sound of her voice a few moments ago. Looks like he wasn't a complete waste of time. Seeing him about to speak, she cut her thoughts short and turned her attention back to him. For your information, I've already been to the library, but I need more info to decide what kind of ninja I'm going to be. He started taking little breaths to calm his nerves. He decided it was best to be clearer about what he wanted from her. Anko regarding him critically for a moment. She had to admit she was a little impressed by the kid. He had stood up to her. Not an easy task given her reputation. And he had initiative, not something common in the average brat. He was an interesting little punk. Let's see if he could keep impressing her. Before Naruto could even blink, he found himself being lifted off the ground and thrown unceremoniously over the scary lady's shoulder and carried off to Kami knows where. Hey! Put me down! He shouted, wiggling furiously in her grasp. Was this a kidnapping? Her grip tightened and a fearsome grin broke out on her face at his flailing. They were so cute when they tried to fight. You said you needed help, right? Then leave it all to Anko-chan, I guarantee you won't regret choosing me. She cooed, laughing to herself as he seemed to fight harder, not at all reassured by her words. Naruto could only sadly lament his life choices leading up his abduction. He should have just left. He would spend the rest of the trip offering prayers to any deity he could think of, while Anko cackled, making her way deeper into the village. A dango shop. He had to admit, part of him was sure wherever she had planned to take him would be worse. This was actually sort of nice if he had to be honest. The smell of freshly cooked dango filled the little shop, and its smaller size and seating booths created a cozy little atmosphere. Maybe he would come back sometime, of his own free will, of course. Finishing his observations, his eyes wandered back to his new acquaintance? Teacher? Kidnapper? Whatever she was, and found her happily enjoying a stick of dango, munching away like she hadn't just taken him off the street without his consent. He pouted as he watched her eat. She didn't even offer him any. He cleared his throat, trying to break the awkward silence and get this over with as quickly as possible and ask his questions. Anko quietly observed the boy as he took in his surroundings, watching as his eyes darted around, taking in the layout of the shop and its patrons, occasionally glancing in her direction before quickly wandering elsewhere. She decided to allow him a moment to get comfortable before getting down to business. It would make him a bit more relaxed, and she could enjoy her food in relative peace. A win-win situation if you asked her. He looked around a few minutes before coughing to get her attention. Looked like he was ready to talk. Finishing her current stick of dango, she leaned back and rested against her seat and addressed him. Now that you've got my attention, brat, what kind of questions were so important that you'd decide to stand in my way? She doubted he would have gone through all this trouble for some basic info, and he'd said he had already visited the village library, so it can't have been something simple either. Perhaps he just wanted to know what it meant to be a ninja. She doubted that, though he was rather young to be asking a question like that. Then again, stranger things had happened. How do you fight? He asked, pausing for a moment before clarifying. What I guess I'm asking is, how do you fight, Anko-san? He corrected. She hadn't been expecting that question. She was anticipating the usual drivel kids wanted to know about being a ninja, like how many jutsu she knew, or advice on weapon throwing. Not personal questions. She leaned forward and rested her cheek against her palm, absent-mindedly chewing an empty stick of dango as she pondered his inquiry. Why do you want to know? She probed him, wondering just what he would need with such info anyway. His face fell a bit as he replied, I want to become a ninja, but before I can begin my training I want to pick out fighting styles that suit me, but there is only so much I can learn from books. He said, taking a moment to breathe. He continued on. I thought, his face turned sheepish at this point, I thought maybe, with you being a ninja already, you could offer me some advice? He finished somewhat meekly, a hopeful look in his eyes. Anko nodded to herself, the pieces falling into place as she considered his request. She thought it was a bit strange he was determined to find a focus so early on, but there were benefits to committing early to certain styles. He would be able to master his skills faster if he was able to narrow his training down to just what he needed instead of allocating time and energy to less helpful studies and exercises. Before I answer, tell me something, brat. Do you have a rough idea of what you plan to specialize in at all? She questioned. He shook his head in a negative, face falling once again at his own indecision. I've considered both ninjutsu and taijutsu, but they feel overdone, I guess. While he still considered the fight he'd seen this morning amazing, based on what he knew, a majority of shinobi ended up specializing in either nin or taijutsu. He wanted to be different, or at least stand out a bit more. Anko nodded. I see. She said, sitting back up. So you want to know how I fight in order to figure out if you might be interested in learning how to do the same. She summarized, filling in the gaps he'd left with his earlier questions. I'm more a jack of all trades kinda gal, brat. I have a little bit of everything under my belt, though I do excel at infiltration and the use of poison. She decided to leave out her talent at assassination for his sake. No need to go scaring him again. Naruto thought on her words. The guidebook had mentioned some ninja fought with poison, but it wasn't commonly used due to extra preparation and knowledge required to be effective with it. Not to mention the danger of accidentally poisoning yourself or your allies. Why poison? He asked. She must have had a reason for choosing it over a more convenient style of fighting. Anko smirked at his confusion. He was clever for his age, but he was still just a kid in the end. Tell me something, if you could take out 5 opponents in 1 move, or 5 opponents in 10 moves, which would you choose? She asked. He answered immediately, 5 with 1 move. Then you've answered your own question, brat, she said. The beauty in poison is that it only takes a little to do a whole lot of damage, allowing you to get the best results while expending less energy. She explained. Naruto muddled over her explanation, and it made sense. The less energy you used to finish a fight, the more you had to use later in a pinch. He would definitely need to consider that in his search. He was brought out of his musings by a flick to his forehead. It seemed Anko wasn't done talking. Sorry, I was thinking. He muttered. Figured anyway, brat, while I understand what you are trying to do, I think you are going about this wrong. She said bluntly. What do you mean? He asked. Was she saying this information wasn't helpful? Tell me, she began, what are the key things a ninja wanting to be ninjutsu specialist needs? If you weren't lying about studying up, you should know this. Recalling the information he'd read on ninjutsu and its practitioners, he remembered the book saying a large chakra capacity or high chakra control were essential requirements for anyone looking to become an expert in ninjutsu due to its intense chakra requirements. A ninjutsu specialist needs to have good levels of chakra control and a large chakra pool to be most effective in his branch. He responded. Anko nodded and said, that right. Now answer me this, brat. Have you actually unlocked your chakra yet? She asked, already knowing the answer. Well, no, he replied, but what does that have to do with finding my focus? He questioned. If you haven't even unlocked your chakra, how can you know what options are and aren't open to you? She pushed. Seeing his widen at her statement, she moved to strike while he was still following her line of thought. Let's say you leave here and don't want to be a ninjutsu specialist. You train yourself completely in taijutsu or some other style not heavily dependent on chakra for a few years before finding out you have a massive pool of chakra to draw from that would make you a monster in ninjutsu. However, you didn't nurture it because you decided too early on that it wasn't for you when you didn't have all the information. She finished. Naruto was kicking himself. How had he overlooked that? The book stressed many ninja arts were reliant or completed with chakra, and he was supposed to figure out what he wanted to do without even having access to his own. Anko, seeing the boy slump into his seat at the revelation, decided to take pity and throw him a bone. If you want some advice, here's what I would suggest, she said, grabbing his attention as he looked for any way to salvage his plans and wasted time. Forget all the focus business for now and instead work on improving yourself first, she said. Seeing his confused look, she explained. You probably won't unlock your chakra for at least another year anyway. Not unless someone forcibly opened his pathways, and she wasn't about to do that. She'd done her good deed for the day, already helping him out this much. So, instead, she continued, start training your body. Physical conditioning is still useful since no matter you end up specializing and you still need to be in good physical shape to be a ninja, and it's easier to train your body now when you're young, she explained. Naruto pondered her suggestion for a while, weighing up the pros and cons to her advice, and honestly, he couldn't fault her logic. Plus, she was an experienced kunoichi, so she probably knew what she was talking about, having experienced it herself. With that in mind, Naruto hopped out of the booth and grinned. Already new plans started forming in his head. He may not have got what he initially wanted, but he wouldn't complain about all he'd learned today. Turning to face the curious kunoichi watching him, he offered her a wide smile to express his gratitude. Thanks a lot, Anko-san, your advice really helped. I'll make sure I remember you when I'm the world's greatest ninja. He cheered before rushing out of the store and out into the busy streets of the village, waving as he ran out of view. Back inside, Anko could only laugh at the nerve of that little punk. He had spirit, and he reminded her a lot of her past self, so eager and determined to conquer any challenge. She rubbed at her neck, tracing a slightly rougher patch of skin contrasting the rest of the flesh around it. Cammy, it felt like a lifetime ago where her own smile might have been able to match his, before everything had gone so fucking wrong. She could only hope he ended up in a better place than she had. Naruto smiled as he finally arrived at his originally intended destination. His slight detour/kidnapping at the hands of Anko, while troublesome, proved more helpful than he could have imagined. Not that he had imagined anything good coming of it while he was being essentially abducted in broad daylight. He was still a little bit bitter about the whole affair. No one even tried to stop her. Stupid villagers, he grumbled, making his way inside the library, the twin oak doors shutting softly behind him as he entered and began the search for his favorite librarian. Granted, she was the only one he knew, but even if he knew all of them, she would still be his favorite. Checking the front desk, he frowned upon finding his target missing. He supposed she must be in another part of the library, or out reorganizing the shelves. Being the holding place for most of the village's collective knowledge, or at least the non-classified and dangerous bits, Konoha's central library was actually rather large, and without proper upkeep would be a nightmare to fix back up. So, with a sigh, Naruto began his trek through the rose-towering bookcase, his eyes and ears open for any signs of his prey. She had to be somewhere caught up in all these books. He spent the next few minutes searching, pausing occasionally to stop and look around the more hidden-away corners of the building before circling back to where he started, his frown growing deeper at his lack of success. I guess she's just not here today, he grumbled to himself. He really had wanted to go over everything that had happened today. There was so much to talk about. He sucked his teeth at the apparently lost opportunity, before freezing as two delicate hands suddenly covered his eyes and a familiar voice whispered in his ear. Guess who? The voice teased. Face rapidly heating at the close contact, Naruto quickly removed the offending hands and spun to face his attacker with a pout and his best glare. Amagi-chan, don't do that, he cried, trying and failing to hide his embarrassment at being taken off guard. Amagi giggled softly into her sleeve at his pouting face. The boy was just so expressive, even for a child. A far cry from Nara clan children who often reacted to everything with either exasperation or disinterest. She couldn't help but tease him a little. She idly noted that they were rather close for two people who had only met the day before. She chalked it up to how open the boy was with her. He wore his feelings on his sleeves and his thoughts came alive in his eyes. It was hard not to be drawn in. She reached out and ruffled the boy's hair, ignoring his indignant squeak and smiling to herself that despite the annoyed front he put on, she could feel him leaning into her touch, a silent demand for more attention. She played with his hair for a few moments longer before removing her hand, pretending she hadn't noticed the slight frustration in his eyes at the departure. To spare him some dignity, she made her way over to her chair behind the desk and gestured for the boy to sit in the spare one next to her. He quickly scrambled onto it and turned to face her. A bit of red still tinted his cheeks, but she saw the slight smile that hinted at his contentment. So, what brought you back here so soon, Naruto-kun? She asked. I wasn't expecting to see you again for at least a few days after you left. At her question, Naruto seemed to snap out of his light daze and he remembered just why he'd come here in the first place. I'm here for two things, Amagi-chan, he said, holding up two fingers for emphasis. Amagi-chan? She hadn't noticed it the first time, but he had called Amagi-chan earlier when she'd frightened him too. She supposed he felt comfortable around her. The thought made her both happy and sad. Happy the boy felt safe enough with her after only one meeting to refer to her so affectionately. However, it saddened her that the boy was so starved for positive attention that he was quick to latch on to people for showing basic acts of kindness. Just how bad were things for him? She doubted she would never really know unless he told her. Frowning at her thoughts, she tuned back in to see the boy looking at her expectantly. Sorry, Naruto-kun, can you repeat what you said? I spaced out for a moment, she said, offering him an apologetic smile. Naruto nodded and moved to repeat himself. I said, I came here to thank you for the books you let me borrow. They were really interesting and helpful, especially the bingo book. Did you already finish them both? She questioned. It had only been a day. Naruto shook his head. No, I'm halfway through the book on ninja arts, and I've only skimmed through the bingo book this morning, he admitted. I see. She nodded. What else did you come here for then? She asked. I also came to ask if you had any books on physical conditioning or body training exercises, he said, making his request. Physical conditioning or body training? She repeated to herself. Have you decided to focus on taijutsu? Once again the boy shook his head before answering. I've decided to put off finding it until I have more information about myself. I met another ninja on my way here who suggested I focus on building my body's strength up first. She nodded to herself. She understood now. I'm sure we have a book on training exercises somewhere in that pile I made for you. Give me a moment to find it, she said. Standing quickly, she made her way over to a cart hidden away towards the back end of the rounded desk. Amagi shuffled through a few books before selecting one and making her way back over to him. This one should have everything you need to get started, she said, handing him her selected text. Naruto inspected the book for a few moments. It wasn't as thick as the guidebook Amagi had lent him previously, but it was a little thicker than the bingo book was. It had a solid red hardcover, and on it in bold black print were the words, "Beginner's Guide to a Better Body, by Might Dai." Besides the author's name, a small indent in the shape of a fist could be seen. "Now I should let you know, Naruto, you can only borrow 3 books at any given time," Amagi told him. "If you want another one, you'll need to return 1 book in exchange." She finished. Naruto nodded in understanding and made a mental note to finish the guidebook soon in case he needed to exchange it for something else. "Is that all you needed today?" she asked. Naruto thought to himself for a moment before slapping his palm against his face. How could he forget the last thing he'd come here for? "I almost forgot, Amgai-chan, I also came to tell you about what I saw this morning," he said excitedly, bouncing up and down in his seat in barely contained excitement. "Oh? Well, go on, don't keep me waiting," she replied, feeding into his excitement. "It all started this morning when I left the house this morning." Naruto went on to regale her with his tale of bush espionage, and a dramatization of a fierce struggle between a hulking green beast and a one-eyed scarecrow. Amagi hadn't laughed that hard in a while. Naruto left the library an hour later with a large smile, and an increasingly familiar warm fuzzy feeling in his chest. Today was a good day. Naruto decided to return home, to get started on his new book. He had considered heading towards one of the training grounds to start his training right away, but Amagi had pointed out it was already midday, and he would be better off starting tomorrow morning after he read up on training methods rather than reading as he went along. He still stopped by the training yards, though he wanted to pick one out ahead of time so he could get there early. Eventually, he found one not too far from the village but perfect for his needs. After marking the spot, he headed home. Now here he was, flipping through pages of his latest source of information, and he had to admit, whoever Might Dai was, they had written a pretty simple but effective book. Unlike the Ninja Arts Guide, this one was less about the theory and mechanics behind everything, though there were some side notes here and there, and more about how and why certain exercises improved specific talents and helped build better body habits. It was also deceptively short. Each page wasn't filled to the brim with text and definitions as he'd expected, but rather visual aids on how to perform certain stretches or movements to get the most out of training. He'd actually managed to finish it before nightfall and was now creating a training schedule for himself as the book had recommended, stressing it was better for the body to have a routine than to just bounce from one exercise to another with no patterns. That was another thing he liked about it. The book was filled with warnings about the dangers of bad forms and practices, providing him with the means to avoid damaging his body needlessly. With the advice from the text, he had managed to put together a beginner training schedule for himself until his body was ready to handle the strain of more intense workouts. Wake up, 7 a.m. Perform warm-up stretches, 10 minutes. Laps around the training ground, 6 laps. Rest, 15 minutes. Crunches, 3 sets of 25, 2-minute rest between sets. Push-ups, 2 of 15, 2-minute rest between sets. Squats, 3 sets of 10, 2-minute rest between sets. Rest, 10 minutes. Practice proper punching technique, 50 punches with each arm. Practice proper kicking technique, 50 kicks with each leg. Rest, 5 minutes. Laps 1. Crunches, 2 sets of 10, 2-minute rest between sets. Push-ups, 2 sets of 5, 2-minute rest between sets. Squats, 3 sets of 5, 2-minute rest between sets. Cool-down stretches, 5 minutes. Looking over his schedule, he was a little concerned about the amount he would have to do, but he wanted to test his limits, and he could always adjust it. He couldn't handle it. The book had mentioned weights, but informed him that younger users should wait until they were a bit older to begin using them to avoid stunting their growth, so that was off the table for a while. The book also stressed his diet, and this was the one point he wanted to ignore with all his heart. He needed to cut back on ramen. He absolutely loathed the idea of not having his favorite salty food constantly, but the book was adamant a healthy diet would ensure the best possible results and help reinforce his body. So far, books hadn't led him astray, so he would do it. Under heavy protest, though. Noticing the time, he decided it would be best to prepare for bed. Sleep was important, and he had a feeling he would need all the rest he could get starting tomorrow. Oh, how right he had been. Waking up at 7 wasn't that bad. He would have liked more sleep, but he was also pretty excited, so it hadn't taken him long to get ready and make his way over to his selected training grounds. Once again, the guards made no move to stop him from wandering off, so he arrived fairly quickly once he located the trail he'd left the day before. It would probably get faster once he fully memorized the way over. The warm-up stretches posed no real issues, being naturally flexible due to his age, and within a few minutes, he felt limber and excited to take his first steps towards his dream, and quickly began the next step, his laps. The excitement didn't last very long. Had he been timing himself, he would have found out that one lap around the training ground took him about 5 minutes, with each subsequent lap taking a little bit longer due to fatigue. It took 12 minutes to complete the 4th lap, and his legs and lungs burned from the non-stop running. By the time he'd finished the final lap, he had spent almost an hour on the laps alone. Everything hurts, he quietly noted to himself, chest heaving to take in all the air it could despite the pain. Even for a stamina monster like him, trying to keep up the pace was hellish. He thanked whatever deities listening that he'd had the foresight to put a small break in between his laps and the rest of his workout. Greedily milking his 15-minute break for all it was worth, he slowly pushed himself onto shaky legs to begin the next exercise. His body shouted at him to stop and let it recover more, but he squashed those thoughts as best he could. He hadn't come this far to give up just yet. Moving on to the crunches, he quickly set himself to work, ignoring the pain as he pushed his untrained body to meet his demands. The workout was just as equally mental as it was physical. He continued in this way for the rest of the morning, pushing himself harder and harder even as his limbs began to go numb. He still refused to stop, taking breaks only when permitted by his outline. Push-ups, squats, punches, and kicks all done to the letter. Sweat dripped down his body, drenching his hair and stinging his eyes. His shirt clung to him like a second skin, covered in dirt and grass stains from the few times he'd collapsed in exhaustion, before pulling himself back up to go at it again. If you asked anyone, they'd probably say he looked like shit. He sure felt like it, that's for sure. Leaning against a nearby tree, he simply stared into the sky, too tired to consider moving for a while. He watched as the clouds drifted lazily in the sky, making notes of any odd or unique shapes with little noises. He didn't have the energy to speak at the moment. He didn't know how long he lay there just staring at the sky. He experimentally tried to move his arms but found little success, same with his legs. So alone he sat with his thoughts, and he had a lot to think about recently. He thought about his dream, to be the best ninja ever, and for the first time he wondered what that would look like. Different images of an older him in various outfits and equipped with various weaponry flashed through his mind mentally, occasionally grunting out his approval or disapproval of a certain look. He then thought about the village and its people, the cold looks and harsh whispers he'd been exposed to for as long as he could remember. He had tried to apologize for whatever he had done to earn their hate. He tried to be better, more polite, more welcoming, but nothing had ever worked. In the end, he was always alone. He hated it. Sometimes he even admitted quietly to himself he hated them. Could he really claim to love the village if part of what made the village what it was were the people who shunned him? Could he love a place that didn't love him back? He never noticed the tears that slowly leaked out of his eyes at his darker line of questioning. He was too tired to fight them and too upset at them to care. He couldn't hold the mask up all time. He couldn't pretend to be happy forever. He needed to let it out at some point. So he did. He cried, and he cried, and he cried until eventually there were no more tears to shed. For the first time in a long time, he just let everything go and wept for what he never had. The family he never had, the love of parents who would care for and would support him. That would be there for him just like the other children had. The toys he never got, too poor to afford such things, he always had to save to buy food and clothes. And what good did toys do if you ended up having to play by yourself anyway? That brought him to the thought that hurt the most: he didn't have any friends. He could accept not having parents. He knew other orphans existed, he wasn't alone. He knew not every kid had or could afford toys. Those too he could live without. But friends? It seemed everyone but he could have those, could have someone to laugh with and share his secrets. It wasn't fair. Why couldn't he have those? Why was he the one always left out? Why was he always the one that had to be alone? He clenched his teeth, his dirty hair shadowing his eyes as negative thoughts swirled violently in his head. It's why he hated coming home to his little empty apartment, its dirty walls staring back at him, almost taunting him. With no one to talk to, he could only sit and think, and the more he thought, the lonelier he felt, and the lonelier he felt, the angrier he got. He wanted to be anywhere else right now. He wanted to run and never stop running until he didn't have to think anymore. Until his heart stopped hurting. He couldn't, though his body refused to obey, refused to listen to the one last thing he demanded from it, too spent to give him this one small comfort. So, instead, he had to remember. He remembered the endless sea of glaring faces. He remembered the unending taunts and the jeers from adults and children alike. He remembered the broken windows and vandalized walls he would come home to after a long day out, and the hours he would spend cleaning while passers-by laughed at his misfortune. He remembered the warm feeling in his chest the first time someone had truly acknowledged him. That someone had looked upon him, not with scorn or indifference but warmth and understanding. Someone had opened their arms to him without malice and gave him a place where he experienced something he never had before. The feeling of being wanted. Amagi had never turned him away. In fact, she had gone out of her way to help him repeatedly. She believed in him when he spoke, never once doubting him, or mocking his dreams. She had been a true friend to him, his first real friend. His tear-stained cheeks stretched wide, his earlier thoughts being beaten back by the sheer force of his positivity. A damaged but true smile settled on his face. Things weren't perfect, but they were starting to get better one step at a time. Calling on all the strength he could, he slowly and shakily raised his clenched fist above his head, inch by painstaking inch, until his arm was fully outstretched above the tallest spike of his hair. Through grit teeth, he repeated his promise to him. He would be the best damn ninja this world had ever seen or die trying, and he would make the whole village recognize him for it. That was an Uzumaki promise. 1 month. It had been 1 month since he started his training. Every morning, rain or shine, Naruto made his way over to his secret training ground and worked himself until his muscles burned and his bones ached. Often he had to drag himself back home through sheer force of will before collapsing. It was the most grueling thing he'd ever done, and he was somewhat ashamed to admit he'd considered throwing in towel more than once. He was still a child after all. But he made a promise that first day. He swore to himself that no matter what, he would become the best and prove everyone wrong. He would make them see just how great he was. His resolve only strengthened once he started showing slow signs of improvement. About a week and a half in, He had noticed he was able to maintain his running pace for longer during laps before falling off. He was less tired at the end of every set and collapsed far less frequently than he had when he'd first started. By the end of the third week, he had become accustomed to his routine, no longer struggling to get out of bed in the morning, and he completed all his assigned exercises much quicker than before. However, his training had given him some odd revelations about his body that he couldn't really explain, mainly in regards to how his body healed. The training guide explained the basics of how muscles worked and why he experienced pain after a hard training session. Essentially, his muscles were tearing and repairing themselves as he pushed them past their usual limits. This process resulted in stronger muscles but temporary pain as the muscles took time to heal from the tearing. His concerns had come in just how quickly his body seemed to recover from this process. The guide mentioned that for beginners, depending on how hard they push themselves, it can take anywhere from a few days to about a week to shrug off the initial aches and pains of training. Somehow, he had managed to almost completely recover overnight. The morning after his first training session, he'd been mostly back to 100%. Sure, he had been slightly sore the following morning, but nothing like how the book had gone through length to warn him about. He'd asked Amagini if she had any clues as to why he seemed to heal so quickly, being his primary source of information besides books. He had initially been worried that maybe he wasn't pushing himself hard enough, so his body wasn't responding properly. She had quickly waved his concerns away on that idea though, especially after he had shown her his training plan. While she couldn't offer him an explanation as to why he seemed to recover faster, she reminded him that every person's body was different, and perhaps he just happened to possess a quicker healing rate than most others. He'd been a bit skeptical of that answer, finding it too convenient, and so he decided to find a way to test and see just how much faster he could recover in comparison to a regular person. In the quiet of his home, he took a kitchen knife and made a small cut on the tip of his finger, just enough to draw blood, and waited to see how long it took for the cut to heal. The bleeding stopped in less than 5 minutes, the wound closed in about 10, and he couldn't even tell he had been cut after about half an hour. He had then asked Amagini how long it took her to recover from a similar minor injury. She had told him about a week for a complete recovery. That was a lot longer than he'd been expecting, and it only made him more curious. It was one thing to heal quickly, but this seemed to go far beyond anything he could think of. He had tried looking into the few medical books the library had available, but they were far too advanced for him, and he wasn't really sure what to even begin looking for in the first place. So, with a heavy heart, he put his quest for knowledge in that area behind him until he was more equipped to delve into the inner workings of the human body. On a more positive note, a faster recovery meant he could accelerate his training, something Amagini had pointed out to him much to his joy, though she had made him promise not to push himself too hard. He didn't have it in him to deny her request, especially not when she asked while playing with his hair and giving him that sweet smile of hers. That was a low blow, and they both knew it. He swore could feel the smugness radiating off her when he'd finally broke and given her his word. She was crafty for a librarian. Shifting his thoughts away from his bodily questions and cheeky librarians, Naruto decided to head out for the day and just walk around the village. For the past month, other than the training grounds, he had only really visited 3 other locations, those being the library for new books and to visit Amagini, the bathhouse to help rest his body after training, and Ikaru's for his 1 bowl of ramen a week. He was still protesting that. Either way, he hadn't really had the time to just walk around the village, and since he finished training early today, he might as well go see if anything interesting was going on or if the traveling merchants were selling any special wares from other villages. With his plans for the day finalized, he quickly packed his supplies away and set out to explore. Boring. There was literally nothing here he hadn't already seen before on his previous trips through the market, and nothing of value that warranted spending his hard-saved money. There were a few well-known con artists that swung into town from time to time claiming to have limited one-of-a-kind items to trick idiots and little kids out of their money, but he had long since stopped indulging them. Let it be known, growing up an orphan had made Naruto rather reluctant to part with his money for anything he couldn't fully see the use or value of. Giving up on finding anything useful or interesting, Naruto decided to head to the park not too far off from the market district where parents often left their kids while they went shopping or ran their stores. Konoha Park, or Little Root Park as it had come to be known, was the oldest and most popular park in the village. Partly due to its proximity to the village marketplace, but also because rumor had it the Shodai had created the trees that made up the small forest found within it as a symbol of peace. A place for children to be happy and protected, a place untouched by horrors of war. Whether or not that information was actually true remained a mystery, but the idea itself created a sense of pride and community in the village, and so the park was very well maintained and popular because of it. Naruto decided he would walk along some of the small trails that wound through the other edges of the park. He didn't want to attract any unwanted attention from nearby parents with his presence. It wouldn't be the first time angry mother or father dragged their kids away mid-play session because of him. Shaking those negative thoughts away, he started along a dirt path, absent-mindedly weaving between the trees and rocks that dotted the trail as he walked along, swatting away the occasional bug that decided to get a bit too close for his liking. Nature had always made Naruto feel at home. There just wasn't anything like it to the blonde. The sunlight peeking through the gaps in the trees brought the forest to life in an almost mythical way that just he never saw anywhere else in the village. Closing his eyes, he took a moment to just enjoy the experience, the gentle but sweet aroma of the wildflowers, the sturdy but unnaturally smooth texture of the trees, the soft, muffled sounds of someone crying. Wait, crying? Naruto's eyes snapped open and he listened more closely, doing his best to tune out the buzzing of nearby insects and distant shouts of the playground children. He strained his ears, searching for what he'd heard. He heard it once again, faintly further up the trail, just hidden away by the playful screams of children and dense woodland. A soft but audible sobbing reached him. Concern gripping him, he ran towards the sound, his earlier peace forgotten. Hinata knew she wasn't the bravest girl. She wasn't even the smallest bit brave if she was brutally honest with herself, unable to even give her name to a stranger if pressed without tripping over words and making a fool of herself. It was difficult to believe she was the heiress of the famed Hyuga clan, a group known for their stoic and unflinching disposition. She was a disappointment, a failure, a coward. She never felt like she belonged, not at home and not with the other children either. She didn't know how to approach them. All her attempts had failed in one way or another. You're pretty weird, don't bother us. Huh? Speak up, don't you know how to talk? You're too small to play with us, go ask someone else. She didn't even have the courage to start a conversation, let alone keep one going without annoying others with her meek behavior. So she was understandably surprised when 3 children a few years older than her approached, smiles on their face as they invited her to play with them. She had almost been too shocked to respond. They wanted to play with her. She had worn her favorite white yukata today. Her mother had made it for her, saying it would bring her good luck. She didn't think it would actually work, but she was willing to try anything at this point. She almost couldn't believe it. She wanted to cry. Someone actually wanted her. The shy little Higwa who could hardly utter a word. She had barely managed to nod her head to say yes before they grabbed her hand and started leading her down one of the forest trails, telling her they had a secret little spot to play at. She wasn't supposed to go into the forest. Her parents had warned her it wasn't safe unless she was being supervised. But she didn't want to lose this chance. Just once she wanted to play with the other kids and laugh with them instead of watching from the sidelines. So she let them lead her through the dense grouping of trees, past the tall rocks and off the path, to a small open clearing hidden away. She turned to face her newfound friends, looking to them for instructions on what to do next. She never had anyone to play with before. She didn't know what to do, and she was afraid of disappointing them with her awkwardness. They stood behind her, much closer than when they had approached her, smiles still on their faces. But she couldn't help but notice they wore a different kind of smile, not the warm ones they had greeted her with, but a cruel smile, one that promised mischief and trouble. What are we going to do now? She stuttered. She didn't like their grins, they made her uneasy. But she squashed that feeling. They were her friends, and she would trust them. Oh, we've got this really fun game called Mud Bomb that you'll just love. The one closest to her answered, a brown-haired youth with a gap in his teeth. Suddenly the other 2 boys flanking him darted forward and grabbed her arms, locking her in place. What are you doing? She cried. Let me go. She could feel her heart pounding as she struggled, trying to get out of their grasp, but their grip held tight, keeping her in place, laughing at the big, wet tears leaking from her eyes as she panicked. Kami, are you really a Hyuga? The one standing in front of her sneered. To think Kento-sensei told us you guys were one of the strongest clans in the village, but all I see is a big baby. He taunted. He bent low and scooped a pile of wet dirt and gunk into his hand, shaping it into a deformed but clearly ball-like shape. I said we were going to play Mud Bomb, and I meant it. Now I think I don't need to explain how this works, he said, laughing at her fright look at the mud dripping between his fingers. Please don't. She begged. She wasn't a vain girl. She didn't care much about clothes or wealth, but this outfit was special to her. She couldn't bear to face her mother if it got ruined. She wept loudly, the sound of her crying bringing pause to 3 boys who looked at one another uncertainly. They hadn't really expected her to break down crying like this when they had grabbed her. Before they could make any further decisions, they were interrupted by a shout behind them from a familiar blonde-haired boy. Hey! You better leave her alone! He yelled, running into the clearing, glaring at the 3 boys ganging up on the scared girl. His words seemed to shake the leader out of his stupor, and he glared at the smaller youth, challenging him. You better beat it, brat, or you'll be next, he said, trying to scare the blonde off. I'm not going anywhere, and if you lay another hand on her I'll beat you black and blue, that's a promise, Naruto said, clenching his fist to emphasize the threat. Fine, if you want to save her so bad, then you can take her place. The boy gave a battle cry and hurled the mud ball in his hand at Naruto suddenly, catching him off guard. Not expecting the attack, the mud ball collided with his face with a wet smack, blinding him and causing him to stumble back, furiously wiping away at the muck covering his eyes. He was interrupted though by a sudden pain in his left cheek as he was sent sprawling to the ground by the older boy fist. Ha! You should have left when you had the chance. The bully laughed, as he watched Naruto struggle to regain his bearings. Hinata could only watch helplessly as the boy who had tried to help her crawled along the floor, rubbing his dirt-covered face. He was hurt because of her, because she wasn't strong enough, because she didn't listen to her parents, because she was useless. She never hated herself more than at this moment. Naruto growled from his position on the floor. That cheap bastard wouldn't even fight fair with a kid younger than him. The coward! Fine, if he wanted to fight dirty, then so would he. Finally wiping the muck out his eyes with his sleeve, he scanned the floor and found a small stone, and quickly formed a risky plan. He just needed for the bully to take the bait, and he could turn the tables. Grabbing the stone, he hastily flung it at the older boy's head and watched with bated breath as it flew towards him. The bully, noticing the rock making its way speedily towards him, quickly turned his head watching as the object flew harmlessly by, past him and landing in some nearby bushes. "Looks like you missed, you little sure GH." The boy screamed in pain mid-taunt as Naruto's small fist buried itself solidly in his stomach. Naruto smiled to himself at how well his distraction worked. He had hoped the elder boy would spend too long tracking where the rock went that he would leave himself open and giving him time to land a surprise hit. It was a bit of gamble though. If the body hadn't kept looking he would have been ready, and he wasn't sure he could beat the boy in a straight fight. His gamble paid off. He now needed to act quickly. Naruto knew one punch wouldn't put the boy down for good, and he needed to act before his buddies figured out what was going on and tried to lend any assistance. Following his punch up, Naruto raised his leg with as much force as he could and slammed his knee right into the crotch of his opponent. Taking silent satisfaction in the pain scream the boy let out. "That'll teach the smug prick to throw mud in his eyes." The bully slumped to his knees, chest heaving at both the pain in his gut and the burning sensation between his legs. His vision swimming with stars due to pain. Naruto wasn't done yet though. Pulling back his left fist as he had been for the past month of his training, he took a moment to center himself before punching forward with all his strength, planting his fist right into the boy's cheek with a crack. He was out like a light before he hit the ground. The rest of the onlookers watched in shock as the dirty-faced blonde stepped on and over his unconscious opponent, his piercing blue eyes made more intense by the dirt and grime dirting his face. "Who's next?" he growled out. The two other boys looked down at the blonde and their unconscious friend for a few moments before letting the small girl go and booking it, dragging their buddy along the way as they hightailed it away from the clearing. Naruto watched them run until he was sure they were gone before turning back to the last remaining witness to the event. She was a small girl he noted standing a few inches shorter than him. She had short navy blue hair with two long bangs framing her round face. But what really caught his attention were her eyes. He'd never seen lavender-colored eyes before. Hinata stared at the boy who had saved her, putting himself in harm's way without hesitation and for no reason other than to help her, a girl he didn't even know. It reminded her of the stories her mother would read to her before bed, ones about the hero defeating all the villains and rescuing the beautiful princess before falling in love and living happily ever after together. Here was her prince, his whiskered face covered in slime and mud with dirt staining his clothes, breathing heavily from his earlier encounter and a bruise where he'd been hit by the older boy, and staring right at her with the most beautiful blue eyes she'd ever seen. She felt her face heating up and heartbeat quickening the longer she looked at him. She felt like she was going to faint at any moment. For a few moments, the two just took each other in, a peaceful silence falling on top of them as they inspected one another carefully, taking in every little detail. Eventually, the silence had to be broken. The boy walked over to her and smiled. To her, it was as bright as the sun, brighter than that even. He wiped his hand along his pants, removing as much dirt as he could before holding it out to her and speaking proudly, his chest puffing up a bit. "Hi. I'm Naruto Uzumaki, nice to meet you," he said, his goofy grin widening at his introduction. Hinata couldn't help but giggle at his energy and openness. In a way it made her feel confident in herself, like he was sharing a part of him with her. She gave a shy smile in return before reaching out and taking his larger hand in hers. Hello, I'm Hinata, Hinata Hyuga." She answered a bit loudly, but it didn't seem to bother the whiskered boy in the slightest. If anything, he seemed to like her loud introduction. "Hey, wanna be friends?" he asked, the smile not once leaving his face. Hinata made a mental note to never doubt the lucky yukata again. Naruto whistled quietly to himself as he made his way back towards the village from his usual morning training session, taking advantage of the natural shade of the surrounding trees to cool himself and hide from the summer heat. Summer in Fire Country was a rather unpredictable affair, with weather ranging from the picturesque sunny skies and gentle breezes that brought the whole village out and about, to oppressive heat waves that brought traffic in the village to a crawl as civilians and ninja alike tried to escape the harsh sun by remaining indoors. He idly wondered how ninja from Suna managed to live in a desert all year round without going insane from the heat. Then again, some of them apparently fought with dolls, so maybe they weren't all there in the head to begin with, if you caught his meaning. Snorting to himself at his line of thought, Naruto turned his musings to the more pressing events of the past 2 weeks, specifically his meeting with one particular blue-haired heiress. Flashback. The two released one another's hands, but their smiles never fell, both unaware of the other's shared joy but unconsciously understanding of the significance in their simple gesture. "How did those jerks get a hold of you anyway, Hinata-chan?" Naruto asked, curious to what had landed his newfound friend in trouble with the older boys in the first place. She didn't look like one to run with groups of troublemakers. At his question, Hinata's face seemed to fall, her previous happy smile forgotten as she looked down shamefully at the forest floor, remembering the series of events that had led to her temporary capture and her new friend's disheveled state. They asked me to follow them to play a G game," she stammered out, face flushing as she recalled her own failure. "I thought a W would be safe with them," and her voice trailed off, becoming almost a whisper, as small tears formed in the corner of her eyes. She had been so desperate for the smallest taste of friendship that she'd willingly ignored the advice of her parents, and only made trouble for everyone, like she always did. Naruto's eyes softened as he watched her small frame shiver slightly. Silent wet tears rolled down her rounded cheeks as she tried to hold back her sobs. He'd never really had to comfort anyone since he never really had anyone to talk to, and no one ever bothered to comfort him when he was upset, preferring to leave him to his troubles or whisper behind his back. This was new territory for him, but at the same time, he couldn't find it in him to just leave her like that. So he did what he thought was natural, something he'd seen other parents do to make their kids feel better when they fell or came back upset from a game of ninja gone wrong. He walked closer, being careful to avoid covering her in the leftover dirt still clinging to parts of his clothes, and hugged her, softly wrapping his arms around her shorter frame in his best attempt at a gesture of support. Hinata stiffened as she suddenly felt his arms wrap around her face coming to gently rest against his rising chest, taking in the scent of dried grass left over from his brief contact with the forest floor. She felt his chin rest softly atop her head, a reminder of how small she was compared to him. Despite the fact he'd gotten hurt for her sake, he still took the time to try and comfort her. Her tears came out harder now, and she buried her face further into his chest. Why? Why was she always crying? Why was she always the one who needed to be saved? He just held her tighter, softly rubbing her back in what he hoped was a relaxing manner. He wasn't sure what was wrong, but he would do his best to help however he could. How long they stayed like that he didn't know, but eventually he felt her shaking slow, then cease as she relaxed in his arms, content to just lean against him. Why? He heard her whisper into his now wet shirt. Why what? He asked, tilting his head at her question. Had he done something wrong? She looked up from him, puffy lavender eyes meeting his. He could faintly see where the tears had streaked down her face, and the slight tremble in her lips. Why did you help me? She looked down again. Why you don't even know me? She questioned him softly. Naruto frowned at her question. Does that matter? He questioned back at her. Did he need a reason to help someone in trouble? As far as he was concerned, it didn't matter who it was. If someone was in trouble, he would try and help them. But you got hurt. If I hadn't been so foolish, if I had just listened, none of this would have happened. She suddenly went quiet again, and he almost missed her last few words. And maybe if I wasn't so weak, why you wouldn't have gotten hurt? She whispered. Why do you think you're weak? He questioned her as if he couldn't see just how much of a failure she was. Because I am. She cried out, catching him off guard. This was the loudest he'd heard her speak this entire time, and the first sentence she said without a stutter. I only make things harder for everyone. She seemed to deflate in his arms. I can't even talk to people without stuttering. I am just a coward, she finished sadly. Then work to be better, Naruto replied to her simply, as though it was the most obvious thing in the world. She looked back up to him, a small frown on her face. Did he think she hadn't tried to be better, to be stronger? She had tried her best, but her best just was not good enough. Seeing her frown, he gently pushed her off him and took her hand again to focus her attention on him, missing her slight blush as she seemed to realize she had been resting against him for most of their conversation. No one starts off strong. He started locking his eyes with hers. It takes hard work and determination to be strong, he said with a grin, squeezing her hand in his. But most importantly, you have to want to change. How can you get stronger if you don't believe in yourself? How can you expect others to respect you if you don't even have it in you to respect yourself? He exclaimed, not quite shouting but somewhere between a yell and a chant. She could see the conviction in his eyes. He truly believed what he said, as though he had lived through it himself. She looked at him with uncertainty. She wanted to be like him, to possess such boundless confidence, but that wasn't who she was. She didn't believe she could possess an inner fire like him. I don't think I can do that though, she stuttered. Naruto was not deterred in the slightest at her hesitation. If anything, he seemed to grow more emboldened, bringing her closer. You can do anything you want, Hinata-chan. As long as you want it bad enough and work hard enough, you can be anything you want to be. He cheered her on, determined to convince her. Kami, he sounded so sure. He gave nothing away that even hinted he didn't have total faith in her, that he was just talking to make her feel better about herself. How can you be so sure? She questioned. She desperately wanted to believe him, but he barely knew her. How could be so confident in her? Not even members of her family who she knew her whole life had declared such faith in her, barring her mother. His grin lessened into a smaller, but somehow equally reassuring smile. Because we're friends, right? That's all I need to know to put my trust in you, he said without hesitation, his voice never once wavering. She stared in awe at him, the hammering feeling in her chest returning as she looked upon his gentle smile, as she drank in the pure honesty in his gaze, firm in their resolution but kind as he looked down upon her. She felt a slight pressure settle upon her, not a physical pressure, but a prodding of her character. A call to action that she never truly felt before, to take the first step, to finally prove herself. Her throat clenched, the words she wanted to say wouldn't come out, and she felt a heat rush through her, a spark of anger as her spirit fought desperately with her body to escape and assert itself. I want you to be strong, she whispered, voice straining as she tried to convince herself, to show his faith in her wasn't misplaced. Then say it loud and proud, Hinata-chan. He jumped, suddenly dragging her by their still joined hands. Make a promise right here, right now, that you'll become stronger, that you won't shy away from anyone or anything. I will be stronger, she said. Louder, he yelled. I will be BSD stronger, she said, voice raised, his own energy pushing her to match him. Who are you and what do you want? He asked once more, he trademark grin stretching his whiskered cheeks at the defiant spark he saw in her pale eyes. I am Hinata Hyuga, and I want to be strong, she roared in her loudest voice. It carried through the forest, echoing off into the distance. Her chest heaved at the effort, Her throat burned slightly at the sudden strain, sending her into a fit of coughs. Despite the discomfort, she felt a sense of pride. She had never shouted before. It was unbecoming of an heiress and was frowned upon within the compound when not training. It felt good. She was broken from her thoughts by the sound of laughing. She refocused her eyes and saw Naruto sitting on the forest floor, legs crossed, body leaned back with hands and arms behind him supporting his weight. She felt a sliver of dread that he was laughing at her. She wasn't sure she could handle that after all that had happened today. Her fears were unfounded, however, for she could see no mockery in his gaze, but approval. Hinata was hit with a sudden wave of exhaustion, the events of the day hitting her all at once. Her legs gave out, and in a manner not fitting of the Hyuga heiress, she hit the floor with the grace of a hammer. She couldn't care less at the moment. Falling onto her rear with a small squeak, she joined her new friend in laughter, her faint giggles underpinning his bellowing laughter, as the two children lay tiredly in the grass laughing at nothing and everything in the way only children could. Neither of them could remember feeling this content in a long time. Flashback end. Naruto grinned happily at the memory. The two had spent about an hour in that clearing getting to know one another. Hinata shared tidbits about her life and things she liked, such as flowering, pressing, gardening, and even her favorite food, cinnamon buns. He remembered having to hold back a laugh at the glazed look in her eyes and the slight bit of drool he swore seeped out her mouth when she talked about the sweet treat. She had also told him about her clan. Having voiced questions about her unique eyes, she had explained to him the prized jewel of the Hyuga clan, the Byakugan, or all-seeing eye. She did not know everything about it, having not yet unlocked her own, but she had given him a brief overview of what it did. He had to admit it sounded pretty freaking cool, something he'd openly told her much to her embarrassment. Essentially, the Byakugan gave its user 360-degree vision, making it near impossible to sneak up on an aware and ready Hyuga. It also allowed the user to see far off into the distance with extreme clarity, making for excellent trackers. It explained why the Hyuga were so well respected within the village, their innate ability offering enhanced security, and made any attempt at sneaking through the village undetected extremely difficult. The conversation had made him curious about the other clans found within the village. He knew a few of them by name, like the Akimichi, since they ran many of the restaurants located throughout the village and often branded their shops with their clan symbol. He did not know, however, if every clan possessed a unique ability like the Hyuga clan. This, of course, prompted him to once more visit the library to see if he could find any more information about the known clans within or associated with Konoha. Thankfully, the library had plenty of books detailing the various known clans found throughout the elemental nations. Unfortunately for him, though, the books did not go too in-depth on how the bloodlines work, due to clans going to rigorous lengths to keep the inner workings of their abilities a secret to avoid enemies learning how to counter them. Even with only brief explanations, Naruto couldn't help to feel slight jealousy towards children born within clans as he read through some of the more interesting and unique abilities. The power to copy any jutsu or trap someone in an illusion with just a passing glance seemed completely unfair. That had also brought him to another revelation. His first friend was from a well-known clan, and she didn't tell him. Flashback. Amagi-chan, you're part of the Nara clan? The young blonde cried, running up to her with an open book in hand. She stared at him with a deadpan look from behind her desk before leaning over and pressing her finger to his nose, causing him to stumble back as his eyes suddenly crossed, disorienting him. I did tell you, Naruto-kun, when we first met, remember? She said pointedly, reminding him of their early introductions. Naruto rubbed the back of his sheepishly. She had a point. She had introduced herself during their first meeting, but he hadn't been aware of the significance of her family name at the time, and so he thought nothing of it. Sorry. But that's so cool. He gushed. From what the book had told him, members of the Nara clan were well known for their intelligence and their ability to manipulate shadows. So freaking badass. Amagi-chan, can you do cool stuff with your shadow too? He asked excitedly at the idea of his friend making creatures out of shadows, or maybe traveling through shadows super stealthy-like. Amagi rested her cheek in her palm as she leaned against her desk. She debated answering his question. On one hand, if she told the truth, he would no doubt want a live demonstration, which was a lot of extra work for her. Let it never be said she wasn't a true Nara at heart. She was happy to help with running the library. It is her job after all. But outside of that, she was content to spend her days lazing about like most of her kin. On the other hand, if she lied, the boy would be disappointed, and she couldn't deny she had a soft spot for him. He made her days a bit more interesting with his regular visits and sunny disposition, even if he could be a handful at times. I do know a few jutsu, nothing fancy though, she begrudgingly admitted. She wasn't a ninja, it was just required for all clan members to know a few of the basic main techniques on the off chance something happened to the clan and they were forced to rebuild. Can you show me? Please, Amagi-chan, please, please, please? The boy begged, for as mature as he could be, there were sometimes she was brutally reminded he was still just a little kid, a very hyper little kid. She sighed and stood up before running through a series of hand seals, gathering her chakra and calling out the name of her clan's signature move. Shadow imitation technique, she whispered out. Naruto stood motionless for a few moments, waiting for something to happen, frowning as the technique seemingly failed. Amagi-chan, nothing happened. The boy pouted, disappointed she'd gotten his hopes up for nothing. Amagi in response simply raised her right arm and pulled her cheek slightly, and before he could question the odd action, Naruto felt his own arm rise in tandem, and felt himself begin tugging on his own cheek. I wouldn't be so sure about that, Naruto-kun. she said, a hint of mirth in her voice. Let me help you understand, she said, lowering her head to look at the floor, and Naruto's body followed along, looking down at his feet. Naruto quickly noticed his own shadow seemed to be unnaturally connected to Amagi's shadow, creating something resembling a shadow tether between the two of them. His eyes were filled with confusion as he was forced to look straight ahead once more. Do you understand now, Naruto-kun? Amagi asked. The Nara clan isn't the most flashy of Konoha's larger clans. We prefer a more subtle approach to handling problems. She spoke, releasing her hold on his shadow and sitting back down, taking note of his scrunched-up face. He was adorable when he was utterly lost. The most basic technique of the Nara clan, the shadow imitation technique, allows the caster to force the target to mimic the actions of the user for as long as the technique could be held. She informed him. There was more to the move, but that knowledge was for clan members only, and as much as she liked the boy, she had a duty to keep some information on a need-to-know basis. He sadly didn't fall into that category. She immediately regretted her limited demonstration as she was suddenly buried under an onslaught of questions about how the technique worked, how long she could hold, how many targets could she hold, and so on. She should have lied. Troublesome brat. Flashback end. Amagi had answered as many questions as she could without giving too much away that would go against the rules of her clan. He didn't like it, but he understood and was grateful she had at least been able to answer some of the questions even when she didn't really have to. He now knew most of the major clans in the village and had a pretty good idea of their bloodlines and clan traits. The Aburame, Akamichi, Hyuga, Inuzuka, Kurama, Nara, Sarutobi, Yamanaka, Senju, and Uchiha clans were the major players in the village, each bringing different talents to the village, ranging from frontline fighters like the Uchiha and Sarutobi clans to trackers like the Inuzuka and Hiwa clan. It had taken him a while to remember them all, and the book had mentioned there were smaller minor clans scattered throughout the village as well that lacked either the numbers or skills to be elevated to a higher status. Part of him was still a bit bitter about the idea of some kids being born with access to really cool abilities while he was stuck with nothing, but he buried those feelings. There was no use being upset about things he couldn't have, a reality he had gotten used to a long time ago. Regardless, he didn't let his lack of any innate hack abilities discourage him. Heck, if anything, the knowledge only pushed him to work harder. Now that he knew others had an innate head start, he refused to let himself fall behind. With that thought in mind, Naruto picked up the pace and sped off towards the village. He had so much more to do. Naruto sighed to himself anxiously as he reorganized his mountain of training notes and scrolls, filing them away as his thoughts wandered once more to the source of his newfound anxiety. His first day at the Ninja Academy was tomorrow. 2 years had crawled by and he was finally 7 years old. Old enough to enter and begin his 5-year journey to become an official shinobi of Konoha. A lot had happened in the past 2 years, he reflected. He'd grown quite a bit, now standing at about an even 4 feet tall, average for his age and a far cry from how short he had been before. Who would have known only eating ramen wouldn't exactly help him grow? That hadn't been the only change. His hair now reached about shoulder length and still maintained its wild spiked appearance. He had tried once before to straighten his hair, but that didn't turn out very well and he decided to leave it alone, occasionally trimming it when it got too long, but otherwise he let it be. The biggest change after his height was definitely in his body. Over the past 2 years he had slowly increased his training regimen, and it definitely showed. He had lost quite a bit of his baby fat, leaving him rather lean, but he maintained a healthy appearance with a proper diet. He wasn't covered in muscle, he was still too young for that, but already he could see more definition in his body compared to other kids his age and even a few years older. He hadn't spent the past few years just training himself physically either. He was regularly at the library poring over scrolls, manuals, books, and whatever notes he could get his hands on to aid in his development. It also helped that he was close friends with the head librarian, who would occasionally grant him supervised access to higher level material, giving him a head start in his studies for when he finally joined academy. He had, however, deepened his relationships with the few people he did interact with, those mainly being the Ikaraka family, Hinata, and Amagi. The Ikarakas had been concerned at his dwindling presence at their stand and had questioned his whereabouts and health, fearing the boy was ill or even worse, depressed. He'd quickly reassured them that his disappearance was simply due to the health demands of his training and that he just couldn't afford to indulge as much as he used to. The family had been understanding and even went so far as to add some healthier foods to their menu so he could come by more often. He'd been touched by their gesture and made sure to stop by more frequently from then on. His relations with the Hyuga heiress had improved as well after their initial meeting. The two had bonded rather quickly, their contrasting natures feeding off one another, and they met every few weeks when their schedules allowed for it. Due to Hinata's own training as heiress, she didn't have the freedom to goof off as most children had. They occasionally even trained together, with her sneaking off to join him from time to time. That had been the most shocking thing to him. Hinata had grown tremendously more confident very suddenly about a year after they met. She was still rather gentle a majority of the time, but when she was riled up it was best to take cover. He thought back to the last time some bullies had tried to mess with them and shivered. Flashback. Naruto and Hinata were enjoying lunch under the trees in a nearby park, chatting away happily when they were approached by a gang of 4 rowdy boys looking to start some trouble. "Hey! You two!" The apparent head of the group called out to them gruffly. Naruto and Hinata turned to face the group, Naruto with a slightly confused look at the interruption, while Hinata wore a gentle smile, her eyes closed in a picture of serenity, though if one looked closely they might notice the small twitching in her brow. Can we help you? Naruto asked, his head tilted in confusion at the group interrupting their lunch. Yeah, this is our park pipsqueak and if you want to play in it you have to pay up. The head goon barked, his followers nodding their heads in agreement behind him. Hinata's smile grew more strained and her twitching more violent, but this went unnoticed as the group's focus was on the more vocal blonde. That's stupid, it's a public park and besides we don't have any money anyway so go bother someone else. The whiskered blonde replied, turning back to his lunch uncaring of the elder boy's demands. TCH, you got some good-looking snacks there, how about we take those as payment instead? The boy said and reached out to grab one of the laid-out snacks the two were enjoying, specifically a cinnamon bun. Hinata's hand shot out, grabbing the boy's wrist with a pressure that was deceptively tight for a girl her size, slowly crushing the offending appendage in her delicate hands and drawing a startled yelp of pain from the boy. The nerve of these cretins, to interrupt her lunch date, an already unforgivable crime, but then they have the gall to try and steal one of her precious buns. She would bury them all. Her smile never left, as she slowly stood her and for the first time she opened her eyes to look upon the trash that had encroached upon her space. I'm afraid those aren't for you but I have something else you can have, would you like that? She asked, the kindness in her voice contrasting with the vice grip she maintained on the now whimpering boy. Locked in her grip, the bully nodded uncertainly. She gave him something alright, a mouthful of dirt. Naruto watched in awe and slight fear as one by one Hinata gracefully struck each of the boys down, all of them hitting the ground face first, filling their mouths with grass and soil. Finishing her work, Hinata gave a small huff at the exertion, before retaking her seat across from him and grabbing one of her cinnamon buns, tearing a piece off and offering it to him with a radiant smile that was made slightly ominous by the muffled groans of the injured goons beside them. He took her gift with a small thank you and made a note not to upset the girl at all costs. Flashback end. He honestly felt a bit pity for anyone who got in her way. Lastly, his relationship with Amagini had only grown stronger as the two would often be found in the library reading together or going over his training schedule, with her offering second opinions or pieces of advice to help him get the most out of a particular exercise or technique. She had also introduced him to a board game called shogi, that apparently was really popular within the Nara clan, being one of the few activities they didn't find too troublesome to engage in. He had spent countless hours trying to beat her but he still had yet to accomplish that, though he had come close a few times with their last game ending in a draw, something she had praised him for, seeing as few could match an experienced Nara in shogi. Bearing that, not much else had changed for the blonde youth and he had been fairly content with how things were for the time being, though he supposed now he would have to reorganize his schedule since his mornings would now be taken up classes instead of training. Naruto decided to think about that later. He wanted to get to bed and be ready for his first day. Shaking his head and squashing whatever doubts he had, Naruto finished putting the last of his material away before heading to bed. Naruto stood nervously at the gates of the academy, the large building towering above him, as he waited, having arrived a bit earlier than needed. He wanted to make a good first impression, and being late to his first day of class probably wouldn't win him any points with his future instructors. He watched as slowly more and more families dropped their kids off and eventually the field in front of the school filled with children of all ages, some happily chattering amongst themselves, reconnecting with old friends, while others hung back trying to make themselves appear as small as possible, while they steadied their nerves. He scanned the crowd looking to see if he could spot Hinata. She had mentioned that she would also be attending this year, and he would feel a bit more comfortable around at least one friendly face. Sadly, he couldn't spot her in the sea of excited children running around and shuffling back and forth across the field. Guess he would have to wait to find her later. He was broken from his thoughts when the sound of a bell rang out, silencing the clearing as the front doors of the academy opened. For a moment all was still before the older students began making their way inside, having gotten used to this routine long ago. He watched as the younger students followed in the example of their seniors, making their way inside and looking for their assigned classrooms. Naruto lightly fingered a piece of paper in his pocket that had come bundled with his acceptance letter detailing his classroom number, room C9. Merging quickly with the rest of the students, he soon found himself wandering the bustling halls as he searched for his assigned room. C6, C7, C8, C9 he trailed off, standing in front of the sliding wooden door marking the entrance to his new classroom. He could hear a few hushed voices from within the room, so he clearly wasn't the first to arrive, but it didn't sound like he had arrived too late either. Taking a deep breath to calm his nerves, he slid the door open, taking care not to make too much noise as he did so. He wasn't looking to attract too much attention if he was wrong about being on time. The room was set up in an elevated style with long rows of seats that got progressively higher and higher. This probably allowed the instructors to keep an eye on everyone without the need to walk up and down rows of students. He decided to sit in an empty middle row, close enough to the board that he could see clearly but far enough back he wouldn't be directly in front of the instructor. He still wasn't sure how his sensei would react to him, and the last thing he needed was to situate himself directly in front of them if he discovered they had a similar attitude to the majority of the village. Better to play it safe and go for a middle ground approach. Seeing as the class was still empty, Naruto decided he would do a little light reading while the rest of his classmates made their way inside. It would help him unwind a bit, which was a bonus. He quietly lost himself in his reading for about 5 or so minutes before he felt someone lightly poking at his whiskers. Only 2 people knew him well enough to touch him so casually, so unless Amagi started working as a teacher, that only left one culprit. Hina-chan, stop playing with my whiskers, he whined, but his smile indicated he was not at all upset with her actions. She giggled softly at his tone. He always complained when she touched his whiskers but never once moved to stop her. Sometimes he would space out and lean into her hand for a few moments before snapping out of it and pulling away before pouting at her. Era, I'm sorry, but I can't help myself. She laughed, setting herself down to his right. Besides, everyone is almost here, and if I left you to read any more, you'd probably miss the entire class. She finished gesturing around her to prove her point. He blinked and looked up from his book. She was right, the classroom was now almost completely full, with the last few stragglers having arrived and finding themselves any leftover seats they could. He really needed to work on his awareness if a bunch of kids could walk in without him noticing. Before he could comment, however, he heard the classroom door open once more and watched as a man dressed in casual chunin attire made his way to the center of the room before turning to address them all. He was somewhat plain, Naruto admitted to himself. He wore a standard chunin flak jacket with a blue undershirt and blue shinobi pants. Around his head, a Konoha headband sat proudly, declaring his allegiance to the village. His hair was done up in a spiked ponytail, and he had a large scar running across his nose. Good morning, everyone, he spoke, breaking Naruto from his observations as he listened into what the man had to say. My name is Yumino Irika, and I will be your instructor for the next few years starting today. You may address me as Yumino-sensei or Irika-sensei, whichever feels most comfortable to you, he said. It seemed this guy was a bit more relaxed than he had initially expected, not that he had any problems with that. The man continued, before we begin today's instruction, I will be taking attendance. Please stand up when you hear your name, and feel free to correct me if I mispronounce it. You will be with me for the foreseeable future, so better to get any confusion out of the way early. He finished. Naruto grinned to himself at this. He hadn't really had the chance to inspect his new classmates, so this would be a good chance to make note of any special students. Irika began calling students, and for the most part, Naruto found his earlier excitement dwindling a bit. So far, no one had really caught his attention. It seemed like his classmates, while all painful average, coming from civilian families, excluding Hinata. He perked up when he heard the next name called, however. Abirame Shino. A short hooded boy stood slowly up from his seat in the far corner. Very little could be seen of his face. The large hooded jacket he wore covered almost all of his hair, though Naruto could see a few strands of black hair falling out from under it. The boy wore dark black sunglasses masking his eye color. He couldn't get a good read on him, and he resolved to approach the mysterious boy in the future. Akimichi Choji. He looked behind him and saw a rather portly boy stand up and give a small wave. A merry if somewhat nervous smile spread across his face. The boy had a mop brown spiked hair that frayed out in almost every direction, slightly narrowed black eyes, and a swirl pattern on each of his round cheeks. In his resting hand, he could see the boy carried a small bag of what appeared to be barbecue potato chips. Definitely an Akimichi. A few more names passed before he heard another family name he recognized, though this was much more obscure. Harino Sakura. He blinked in amazement as a young girl sitting in the front row quickly stood and bowed. He had to take a few moments to register what he was seeing. Was that even natural? He asked himself. He was referring to the young girl's hair, which was bright pink, exotic when compared to the more common shades or black and brown that dominated the village. He'd also managed to quickly catch a glimpse of her eyes and noted they were a bright emerald green, oddly fitting with her bubblegum hair. The Haruno clan were not a predominantly ninja clan, but rather a wealthy civilian clan that brought in a lot of trade to the village. Essentially, they bought their prestige through wealth rather than power or ability. He was brought out of his musings when he felt Hinata sit back down next to him. She must have been called up while he was thinking. Inuzuka Kira. A few seats down to his left, a young girl quickly stood up, a wild grin on her face as she waved excitedly down at her new sensei. She had a savage look to her, with short, shaggy brown hair that fell to her neck and sharp eyes with slit pupils adding to her wild appearance. On her cheeks were red upside-down triangles, marks resembling fangs denoting her clan. On her head was a small white dog with brown ears resting happily upon her head, who gave a small bark as if to signal its presence as well. She definitely lived up to the descriptions of her clan that he'd read. The next one really got his attention. He knew a lot about this clan. Nara Shikari. Turning once again, he saw situated next to the Akimichi boy was a small black-haired girl resting her head on her palm, lazily taking in her class before sighing and slowly standing up. Amagi had not been kidding when she told him Nara members did not like to do anything physical. He studied her closely, looking for similarities between her and his friend, and noted she possessed the same black hair and eyes that Amagi herself had thought. This girl kept her hair in a spiked ponytail similar to their sensei, and her eyes were a lot sharper, giving her what seemed like an almost perpetual frown. She seemed to notice his gaze and mouthed something quietly to herself before sitting back down and resting her cheek against her palm, once again closing her eyes and seemingly nodding off. Uchiha Satsuki. Goody, a pair of god eyes were in his class. Naruto was still fully convinced the Sharingan was a total hack ability. Congrats on spending a week learning a jutsu. Let me just quickly look at you do it once and make it my own real fast. Yes, he was bitter, so sue him. He looked towards the front and saw a girl with long raven-colored hair and onyx eyes stand up, a small scowl that looked more like a pout on someone her age's face as she nodded towards their sensei before sitting back down. He had an odd feeling deep down that he wasn't going to like that girl very much but decided to at least be civil. It wouldn't be fair of him to judge without at least getting to know her. Uzumaki Naruto. He had caught the brief pause that had accompanied his name, and could see a slight frown on Iruka's face as he looked up from his list to find him, eyes darting to the few students he hadn't already called. Wonderful. Standing up and giving a bow, Naruto locked eyes with his new sensei for a moment. The two said nothing, merely looking at each other before Iruka quietly nodded and marked him off, signaling him to sit back down. Naruto plopped down with a slight huff. He'd seen irritation in the man's gaze but not outright hatred. He supposed that was better than the alternative. At least the man seemed to be giving him a fair shake. Last up was Yamanaka Ino. A young platinum blonde girl stood cheerfully, a large smile on her face as she gave a quick bow that sent her ponytail swaying back and forth. She was very similar to him, with both being blondes and possessing blue eyes, though hers were a much lighter shade than his own. She was not what he'd expected from a mind walker, but she was still a child, so who was to say how she would end up? With attendance done, Iruka began to explain what material they would be covering this year and taking the occasional question thrown his way by curious students here and there. Naruto tuned most of this out, his thoughts centering around the fact that he was in a class with a member from almost every major within the village. This presented an extremely rare opportunity to discover more about the clans than he had previously thought possible. The upcoming years suddenly seemed a lot more promising than before. Naruto's opinion on the academy was, in a word, complicated. He understood the academy was designed to educate, train, and guide its charges in their endeavor to become proud shinobi of Konoha. All well and good, and his mind. So why was it so boring? Naruto banged his head silently on his desk. He wasn't expecting to be handed new jutsu or high-level taijutsu from day one. He understood the value of learning the basics. But they weren't even covering the basics yet. No, instead they got history. Naruto swore if he had to hear about how great the Shodai was one more time, he was gonna shove a tree branch down his throat. He had been tempted to skip class and return to his morning training, but decided to forego that after Hinata pointed out to him it wouldn't look good for him to gain a reputation for playing hooky. He reluctantly agreed. And so here he sat watching Iruka drone on and on about the significance of the clan war era and how amazing an accomplishment the founding of the village actually was, blah blah blah. Maybe he should just make a run for it. Before Naruto could put his plan into action, Iruka clapped loudly, gathering the class's attention and waking those who had fallen asleep during his lecture. He could however still hear the faint snoring of a certain Nara behind him and chuckled quietly to himself, picturing a certain librarian doing something similar at her own desk. "Shikari, wake up!" The man bellowed. This was a regular occurrence for Iruka. She was not the first Nara he'd taught. Naruto swore he heard her mutter curses quietly to herself as she slowly sat up. "Troublesome sensei. Since you all seem to think my lessons are sleeping aids, today we will be moving on to something more physical," Iruka started, giving a small glare towards a few repeat offenders. "I am going to have you all paired up for supervised spars to gauge where you are stand both skill-wise and physically. Please make your way out to the training yards." He finished and briskly made his way out to set up the practice rings. Naruto couldn't help but smirk a bit at the thought of finally doing something practical. Sure, he didn't completely hate history, but he had long since learned a lot of what they were covering years ago, with Amagi's guidance making class somewhat of a chore. Sparring, however, was something he was definitely into. He had only ever sparred with Hinata on a few occasions, and even then the two were somewhat reluctant to actually harm one another, so they were more mock spars than anything really. Here though, under the supervision of trained instructors and strangers as his opponents, he could afford to cut loose a bit more. He quickly made his way outside with the rest of his class and they formed a single file line, right in front of the training field awaiting further instruction. Looking up and down the line, he could see some of his peers were clearly more excited than others to finally get their hands dirty, taking note of the cocky but excited smirk of their resident Uchiha, and the fanged grin spread across the Inuzuka's face. Meanwhile, the chubby Akimichi seemed downright terrified at the prospect of hurting anyone, nervously munching away at his chips as he waited anxiously. Iruka arrived a few moments later and stood in front of them, quietly taking in their varied expression, perhaps judging how best to approach this next step in their journey. "As I said before, these matches will just test to see where you are all at individually, so I have a better idea of what to work on with you all." He started, hoping to reassure students that they were not going to be penalized for performing poorly here. "I know some of you will have been taught small bits of your clan's preferred fighting styles, while others may not have any style at all, or even fought before. That's okay, just do your best for the moment." He finished before holding up a sheet of paper. "For this exercise, I will be picking your opponents to try and keep things somewhat fair, but in future, you will occasionally be allowed to pick your preferred opponents." Iruka had learned it was better for him to pick out the matchup unless he wanted to see some poor civilian-born student get blindsided by a clan child. It didn't teach him much, and all it did was discourage civilians from further pursuing the career. "When I call your name, please step into the ring and wait for my instructions," he said before running down his list. Naruto watched with minor interest at the first few fights. They were nothing special, seeing as Iruka had pitted the civilian children against each other first, and with no real fighting style matches, quick devolved into brute force matches based more on strength than technique. He had paid slightly more attention to the pink-haired Haruno's match though, Despite her frail appearance, she apparently had a mean right hook, something her opponent hadn't expected, judging by the shocked look in their eyes as they rolled out of the ring, granting her the victory. Hinata, Hyuga, and Yamanaka Ino, he heard Irika shout. He reached over and gave Hinata a slight pat on the back for encouragement, earning him a bright smile from the girl as she made her way to the left side of the ring, opposite of her blonde-haired opponent. Hinata stared ahead at the Yamanaka heiress and considered her options. This was a strictly taijutsu-only fight. Those who'd already had their chakra unlocked, mainly clan children, were prohibited from using it and had to rely completely on physical prowess alone to win. That put her at a slight disadvantage. Her clan's fighting style relied heavily on chakra usage to do damage and incapacitate foes. That said, it wasn't as big a handicap as it seemed initially, especially not for something like a quick spar. The gentle fist style could also be used without chakra, though with less efficiency. Striking her target rapidly with just the tips of her fingers worked rather well on its own. The smaller surface area combined with the proper amount of force created an intense stinging pain that with enough time could wear an opponent down and made opponents twitchy. Giving her signature gentle smile, Hinata bowed to her opponent and waited for the signal to begin, watching as the young blonde across from her fell into her own stance. "Begin!" Irika shouted. She gave her opponent little time to collect herself. Darting forward, she quickly slipped into the girl's guard and launched 2 rapid finger jabs into the girl's stomach, immediately destroying whatever counteroffensive she could have planned as the blonde's arms rapidly moved to her abused stomach, trying to defend against any more punishment and soothe the sharp pain in her lower body. That was a mistake on her part. Hinata quickly sent an open palm crashing right into the girl's chin, pushing the blonde backward and shattering her balance, as without her arms available to help steady her, she quickly stumbled back, unable to handle the unexpected onslaught. Seeing the girl backpedal to the edge of the ring, she quick launched her smaller frame into the girl's torso shoulder first to maximize her force, and watched as the young Yamanaka was sent flying out of the ring, landing solidly on her back. Winner, Hinata Hyuga. Her smile never left her face as she walked back over to Naruto, quickly brought her into a one-armed hug, congratulating her on her quick and flawless victory. She thanked Kami, his eyes always closed when he grinned. She didn't want him to see the slight flush of red gracing her cheeks at the contact. A few more fights had gone by. Shikari and Choji had been paired together, although that proved a poor choice when they somehow both managed to get thrown out of the ring at the same time. He would be willing to bet money that it wasn't an accident either. Shino had been paired against Satsuki, and that had proved somewhat disappointing as well. While the Aburame boy was able to briefly keep pace with her aggressive assault, the clear divide in their specialties proved itself when she finally managed to wear him down and swiftly pummeled him, forcing Irika to call the match before any real damage could be done. He noted the frustrated frown on the Uchiha's face as she walked back into line. It seemed she wasn't satisfied with her match. Last match, Kira Inuzuka and Naruto Uzumaki. He heard an excited yell come from the feral-looking girl as she bounded to her place on the practice field, practically shaking in anticipation. It seemed like he was going to have a real fight on his hands. He felt Hinata poke his cheek softly, her way of wishing him luck, a habit she'd picked up after he would pull hers when she stuttered or didn't say what she actually meant. He sent her a play pout before making his way to the field and taking his place across from his eager foe. Naruto quickly went over everything he knew about the Inuzuka clan, looking for anything that would offer him an edge in his fight. They were excellent trackers, possessing heightened senses of taste, touch, sight, hearing, and especially smell. They were also frontline fighters, savage in combat, tearing through anything in their path with fangs and claws, not to mention brave to an almost unreasonable degree, which made intimidation near impossible. He was reminded of a quote he'd heard somewhere before about the tenacity of even the smallest Inuzuka. "It's not the size of the dog in the fight, it's the size of the fight in the dog fight." Staring into the eager slit eyes of his opponent, he couldn't help but notice a lot of fighting spirit in there. He did, however, recall one piece of information he managed to find in an old worn-out text from someone who had fought with and against members from the clan that might help him. Younger and more inexperienced clan members tended to have a slight tunnel vision, focusing heavily on more telegraphed attacks, but had trouble properly defending against misdirection and feints. He didn't know how true that was, but he would keep it in mind. "Begin!" Hearing the starting signal, Naruto decided to allow the feral girl to come to him and start on the defense. He knew that without a proper style he was at a disadvantage, but hopefully his conditioning would allow him to tank some hit and react quickly enough to her offensive. She wasted no time, falling upon him like a rabid dog, lashing out with a heavy punch, hoping to blitz him with her higher-than-average speed. He caught her fist and quickly sent his own returning punch into her surprised face, causing her to step back slightly, but not deterred in the slightest. Did she look more excited? She was on him once again, and he was forced to dodge a barrage of punches and swipes, grunting in discomfort as a few of her swings managed to land or clip him as he weaved through and around strikes. He could take punishment, but not forever. He decided to go for something rather risky. Seeing an incoming punch, he grabbed her fist once again, baiting her. Predicting he was going for another punch, the Inuzuka launched her free arm first, intending to repay him for his earlier counter. He caught that too, leaving them deadlocked in the center of the ring, neither able to make a move. Or at least that's what she thought. Quickly pulling her forward, Naruto brought his forehead harshly into contact with hers in a savage head, but that left her seeing stars for a moment. She wasn't the only one. Naruto stumbled slightly, releasing her arms as he did his best to shake off the ringing in his ears. He needed to press his advantage. Rounding on the still equally dazed girl, he went on the offensive. His aim: put her down fast and put her down hard. Kira, still reeling from the unexpected attack, was unprepared for the fist that crashed into her cheek. Either was she prepared for the one to her stomach, or her arms, or her chest. She was too stunned to react as the blows rained down upon her. She couldn't even face her attacker. Every attempt was met with another strike to the face, and only increased the pounding in her head, weakening her further. She felt her legs get swept out from under her, sending her body crashing into the hard ground, and a weight land roughly upon her still reeling stomach. Her arms were forced above her head and pinned tightly. She felt the blows stop, and took a moment to finally gather herself and look up at her whiskered opponent. He towered over her, his chest heaving from both adrenaline and exhaustion from his attacks. She could see slight scuff marks on his clothes and face from where she'd managed to clip him with a few of her attacks, and his forehead was colored red from the impact of the head but he'd hit her with. Narrowed blue eyes bore into black as the two took a moment to savor the moment of peace and regain some energy trying to recover. She looked at him through her blurry eyes. She hadn't thought much of the blonde at first, thinking this was going to be an easy fight. She could only kick herself at where that line of thought had brought her. Pinned beneath the blonde, she felt anger at her loss and at the pain shooting through her head and body. For a runt, he hit pretty hard. At the same time, though, she felt satisfied, and she admitted she had fun. The Inuzuka were a rough bunch, and it felt good to know there was one person at least who wasn't afraid to match her blow for blow. Match completed via pin, winner, Naruto Uzumaki. At the announcement, she saw the boy's glare vanish, being replaced by a bright smile as he quickly stood up and offered her a hand. That was a fun match. I hope we can do it again sometime, he said, as though they hadn't just been trying to beat each other black and blue. Kira stared his outstretched hand for a moment before taking it and allowing him to help her up. He was a weird one, but she couldn't deny she wanted to fight him again too. And next time she would show him who was boss. She offered him her clan's signature feral smile and nodded her head in an affirmative. They would be fighting again soon if she had her way. The two gave one last solid shake before splitting off and returning to their respective spots. Naruto being quickly fussed over by a worried Hinata and herself attend to by her faithful canine companion licking at her wounds in his own attempt to help soothe her. Iruka stepped forward. With the final match completed, he quickly addressed the class. You all did very well today, he said, focusing their attention back onto him. I have a solid idea of where you all stand, and next week we will begin your physical training alongside instruction in the basic academy style for those of you lacking one currently. As he finished his announcement, the final bell went off, signaling the end of the day and start of the weekend. Already he could hear the patter of feet of students from other classes rushing to meet their families or begin their trip home. Dismissed, he said, chuckling in amusement as he watched his charges bolt towards the door, eager to pick up their bags and head home. Naruto and Hinata chatted happily as they exited the academy building, recalling their own individual matches and the few notable fights they'd seen between other members of their class, thinking of moves they could incorporate into their own fighting styles and how to better prepare for future spars. They were interrupted, however, by a familiar voice calling out to them, or more specifically Naruto. Hey, Blondie! A gruff but distinctly feminine voice yelled out. The two turned around and found themselves face to face with none other than Kira Inuzuka. She was panting a little as she slowed her stride to stand in front of them. Naruto, always the first to open his mouth, responded cheerfully to his new sparring partner. Hi Kira, what's up? He asked, not at all intimidated by her appearance. Actually, now that he was paying attention, he noticed she was actually a few inches taller than him, standing at about 4'3". Add that to her more feral appearance, and it wasn't surprising that some of their classmates were afraid of her. Despite being the one to seek them out, Kira suddenly seemed a bit embarrassed, offering a sheepish grin, her sharp canines peeking out from her lip. Well, I wanted to say thanks, for the fight, I mean, she said, quickly clarifying. I don't really get to go all out like that often, so I was kinda hoping. She trailed off a bit, a hint of red on her cheeks. Why was this so difficult? No one noticed Hinata's smile growing slightly more strained as she watched the interaction. Yeah? Naruto questioned, tilting his head in confusion. Well, I was kinda hoping we could hang out and do it again sometime soon, if that's cool with you, I mean. She asked, trying to keep her composure at her rather unorthodox request. Who asked someone to be their friend just to fight them? Naruto thought about it for a moment. Kira was strong and she seemed friendly enough. Sure, I'd be happy to, and I'm sure Hinata would like to join us, right Hina-chan? He said simply, a small smile on his face as nodded. Of course, it would be my honor, said the brunette, reining in her twitching. She would have joined them regardless. She had to watch for any vultures. Kira nodded and gave a toothy smile, relief spreading through her that he hadn't denied her request. Hee, cool, I have to go. My sister is back there waiting for me, but I'll see you guys Monday, she said, waving as she sprinted off to the other side of the field and out of sight, leaving the two to watch on in silence as she disappeared. I think that went well, the blonde said, spinning on his heel and walking off towards his earlier destination. Hinata could only give a small laugh at her friend's rather easygoing response before quickly making her way to him, falling into step at his side as they resumed their prior conversation. Just another day in the Hidden Leaf Village. 95, 96, 97, 98, 99, 100. A young voice counted out slowly, the strain in their voice indicating some form of heavy physical activity. Naruto lay sprawled out in the center of his old training field, his chest rapidly rising and falling as he tried to regulate his breathing, and banished the familiar burning sensation in his arms that accompanied his physical. He still hated push-ups with a burning passion. Taking a few minutes to rest, Naruto took a moment to review the past 6 months since he joined the academy. Being totally honest, he had barely noticed the time go by at all. He was always busy either attending class, training, or reading, and it was rather easy to lose track of time. Not to say he hadn't accomplished anything in that time, far from it. In fact, he had perhaps taken the 2 most important steps forward towards his goal within the past few months. The first being he had finally found a taijutsu style that fit him. True to his word, Iruka had followed up their impromptu sparring matches with both an evaluation of their standing and advice on where to improve. He had received high marks for speed and power, but his lack of proper technique forced him to make unnecessary and high-risk maneuvers. Iruka steadied his head, but that, while effective, still left him vulnerable and relied too heavily on his ability to recover faster than his opponents to be useful. He had been slightly upset at the critique, seeing as he had won his match, but had to admit if his opponent had been a more experienced fighter he probably would not have gotten so lucky. That knowledge had made him anxious to see if maybe any of the academy styles would help refine his fighting, seeing as there were 3 variations of it to help accommodate for different types of students. The Iron Oak style for more defensive-oriented students who could take a hit and allowed the user to punish openings left by attackers. The Winding Willow style for speedy students who preferred waiting to evade attacks and retaliating with quick strikes, while weaving in and out of an opponent's guard. Lastly, the Burning Pine style was an all-out aggression style for those who wanted nothing more than overwhelm their opponents with a flurry of attacks, never giving them the chance to counter. His results with the 3 had been mixed, however. He had been able to incorporate some moves from each into his brawler/boxer-like style, giving it a bit more finesse than he'd had before. However, none of the styles truly felt right to him in their full forms, with the Willow style coming closest, but it was too passive for his taste, leaving him somewhat out of luck. So, he decided to do what he always did when he ran into a roadblock: go to the library. Contrary to popular belief, one did not actually have to be a shinobi to gain access to certain areas of the shinobi section of the library. Information on things like chakra control, taijutsu techniques, and jutsu theory was all readily available to the public. The village wasn't going to hamper its citizens who wanted to learn to defend themselves, or civilian children who didn't have ninja relatives to fall back on, by keeping everything locked and hidden away. The only requirements to get into the shinobi section without being a registered ninja were to submit a form to gain a pass, which was more so for security than anything, or be a student attending the Shinobi Academy. He had heavily abused that newfound knowledge to spend hours going over scrolls and various texts trying to find a proper style for himself. Within a week he had what he had been looking for: the hummingbird style. The hummingbird style, at first glance, reminded him of the Winding Willow style, with both placing a high emphasis on speed to engage enemies. The difference that caught his attention was that the hummingbird style wasn't about pure evasion, but rather using speed to dance around the target, using unpredictable movement patterns to confuse the enemy when attacking. He spent a few days running through the beginner forms detailed in the scroll and felt it immediately click with him. It played to his strengths and had room to be tweaked if he decided he wanted to pick up a weapon in the future as well. He had spent the next month and a half getting the basics down, and was now working on the starting intermediate moves. The second big event blew even that out of the water though. He had finally had his chakra unlocked. Flashback. Naruto sat in a meditative pose, his eyes closed as Iruka's voice softly explained the process of feeling out their locked chakra cores. Despite all people possessing chakra, it wasn't inherently active within them from birth. Instead, it sort of just sat in the coils, moving slowly, almost like sludge through a pipe, doing just enough to keep its owner alive but not enough to be used for anything else. This slow flow allowed for a person's chakra network to stabilize over time before finally settling, at which point the flow would almost completely stop. Ninja, however, learned to call upon their chakra, moving it throughout their bodies and forcing the flow to continue. This had the side effect of expanding their coils and allowing for the production of more chakra. Essentially, chakra acted like a muscle, and through training, it would grow and expand. The caveat to all this is that the longer someone waited to activate their chakra system, the harder it became to get it moving, and at a certain point it was near impossible to call upon it at all. It is why civilians never suddenly drop their professions to become shinobi. However, if a person's chakra system was activated too early, the coils could be damaged, which was not a pleasant outcome either, so it eventually became standard practice to have children unlock their chakra from the ages of around 6 to about 10. Any later, and the odds of them unlocking it fell dramatically. Iruka spoke again, breaking him from his thoughts as he refocused on his sensei's words. I will be going around to administer the booster shot that'll jumpstart your chakra systems. Don't be afraid of the feeling, but instead follow it, and try to drag your own chakra with it. He explained. The booster shot wasn't like the ones a doctor would give. It would be more appropriate to call it a chakra injection. The process broken down was rather simple. Someone essentially shot a pulse of chakra through you. The pulse would drag your own chakra, speeding up the circulation so that you could feel it and begin moving it on your own. There was a lot of theory behind it that he wasn't even going to try and understand. He was more focused on finding it first before he worked out how it moved. Naruto, are you ready? He heard Iruka ask above him. Yes, sensei, he replied, immediately perking up eager to begin. Alright, remember to try and drag your chakra once you feel it moving inside you, Iruka replied. Naruto nodded and felt the man place a hand on his back and drew in a breath in preparation. Release! Iruka called out, launching a series of chakra pulses through the boy. Naruto waited anxiously, searching for any feeling whatsoever. Nothing, he didn't feel any different, or even anything unusual. Sensei, I don't feel anything, he spoke, confusion and slight fear in his tone as he looked towards his instructor for help. Iruka was silent for a few moments contemplating this news. He tried shooting a few more pules, but the boy remained adamant. He couldn't feel anything. That left Iruka with two possibilities: either the boy had a malfunctioning chakra network, or he'd already had his chakra unlocked and he didn't know it. People who already had their chakra unlocked could barely feel the booster shot due to the fact their chakra was already circulating and the change wasn't noticeable enough for them to register it. Naruto, I want you to try something for me, he said. I want you to imagine a small blue flame right in the middle of your stomach and focus as hard as you can on it. Naruto closed his eyes and tried visualized what his instructor had asked. He gradually felt a warm sensation around his lower stomach as slowly a flicker of azure flame appeared in his mind, sitting at the center of his body. Okay, Sensei, he whispered, trying to hold on to the feeling. Now try and spread that flame through you, he said. Naruto took a breath and gave a small mental heave, willed the flame to grow and fill him. It flickered briefly, expanding slightly but remained unmoving. He tried once more with force, calling out to it and commanding it obey his wishes. The flame did more than flicker this time. It surged forward, consuming Naruto as his mind's eye was suddenly overtaken by a sea of blue fire, the warmth flooding his body and his mind succumbing to the feeling of power surging through him. The reaction on the outside was arguably just as volatile. The boy's body hummed with visible arcs of blue energy blanketing him in a cloak of raw power. Chakra rolled off him in waves and carried enough force to actually create a small gust of wind that sent dust and bits of debris scattering across the wooden floor. Naruto, that's enough, the distressed voice of Iruka called out, snapping him out of his daze. Huh? He blinked slowly, temporarily forgetting where he was, having been lost in the seemingly endless expanse of fire, and the lingering warmth he felt surging throughout his body. A foreign but at the same time familiar feeling. Iruka had never seen a child possess that much raw chakra. The boy easily had almost as much, if not more, than he himself possessed, and he wasn't even half his age. Immediately Iruka's thoughts drew him to perhaps the most obvious conclusion. This wasn't just any ordinary boy, but the container to the beast that had almost flattened the entire village. Iruka took a few moments to compose himself. He had resolved to give the boy a chance, and it wouldn't do to start letting fear influence him. Unless the boy gave him something to worry about, he would be impartial. It seems like you'd already unlocked your chakra, Naruto. You just had to draw it out, he told the boy. Naruto's face scrunched up in confusion. How would his chakra system already be active? As far as he knew, no one had started it for him. Seeing the lost look, Iruka was quick to guess the troubled youth's thoughts and offered his own suggestion. It's possible for a person's chakra system to be activated while they are under heavy stress. Perhaps at one point or another you unintentionally managed to start yours without help, he offered. Naruto frowned slightly at the explanation. Something about it still didn't seem to fit in his mind. Barring a few close calls with drunken villagers, he couldn't recall anything that would fit that criteria. It seemed like another question in a long list of concerns he had about his life. For now, he would move his focus once again to what he could work with, specifically his newly acquired access to chakra. Flashback end. He had been ecstatic at the knowledge that he possessed such a large pool and wanted to start trying out jutsu right away. The idea of bending the elements to his will being almost too much to resist. He quickly found out, however, that he wouldn't gain access to the ninjutsu section of the library until his third year of the academy. Amagini had told him it was done to prevent civilians from getting a hold of dangerous techniques then dropping the program. It was assumed by the third year you were probably going to finish and become a ninja after all the physical and mental investment. That news had been a rather harsh blow to his newfound excitement. He had, however, been able to work on his chakra control instead. Seeing that he had absolutely massive reserves, Iruka had helpfully advised him to begin the leaf balancing exercises, which entailed sticking leaves to his body with just his chakra. That was easier said than done, because for almost a week and a half he hadn't been able to stick more than 2 leaves on himself at any given time, and even then he could only do it for a few minutes before he lost concentration, and they were blasted off, forcing him to start again. He took some small solace in the knowledge that at the very least he'd gotten an early start before his reserves had gotten too big to manage. He would have plenty of time to work on his control while he attended the academy. After months of hard work, he could now do the exercise with up to about 10 leaves without too much trouble, though he was still working to improve that. He'd even changed his training around to include chakra control exercises during his breaks just to make sure he didn't neglect it. His social life had also improved somewhat during this time as well. He stuck to his word and invited Kira to train with him and Hinata, which had proved interesting to say the least. Kira in a way rounded out their little group with her brash attitude and excitable personality that managed to bring even the ever-gentle Hinata out of her shell. Granted, it was usually in a violent manner through teasing and jostling the smaller girl until she snapped and attacked the Inuzuka. Kira took it in stride though and was always more than happy to spar with the Hyuga heiress, and he could tell that despite herself, Hinata enjoyed having someone to just let loose on from time to time. His relationship with her was a lot more straightforward, she had flat out admitted she just enjoyed fighting with him. Unlike Hinata's more graceful approach, the rougher way he fought was a lot closer to her own family style, and apparently that made him the perfect candidate to perfect her own style with. He had to admit she kept him on his toes. Spacing out in the middle of their spars had landed him with a good few cuts from her sharpened nails on more than one occasion. He'd quickly learned to keep his thoughts off the battlefield unless he wanted to walk around looking like a mummy. His relations with the rest of his classmates were somewhat mixed, being either fairly positive or really negative. He'd become close with the heirs of the Aburame, Nara, and Akimichi clans and was often seen with one or more of them during lunch or recess. He was not as close as he was with, say, Hinata or even Kira, but he was confident that with time they would grow closer. On the other hand, he was not at all popular with the Haruno and Yamanaka heirs. Though that had less to do with his personality, or even how he treated them, it was actually because of his none too subtle rivalry with none other than Uchiha Satsuki. Even thinking of her annoyed him. He tried early on to befriend the girl, but she had brushed him off with barely a glance, like he was beneath her notice. If that had been the end of it, he probably wouldn't have cared, but it seemed fate had other plans for the two. The Uchiha heiress had been more than content to completely ignore him until they had been paired together in a spar a few weeks later, with Iruka wanting to see how much he had progressed since their talk, especially since he wasn't studying any of the academy styles. The fight itself wasn't notable, since Iruka still made sure to interfere if anything looked to be going too far, and with the aid of his newly found taijutsu style he'd managed to fight her to a draw. That was saying something, as Satsuki was arguably one of the best fighters in their class, with only Hinata, Kira, and himself being able to challenge her at all when it came to pure hand-to-hand combat. After that, the Uchiha had apparently made it her personal goal to beat him in anything and everything: test scores, weapons throwing, and of course their weekly spars. She made it a point to always choose him as her sparring partner when the chance presented itself, to the point no one besides Hinata and Kira even bothered to pick him anymore. He'd called her out on it more than once, but she only ever responded with vague insults or grunts. "Your stupid face pisses me off, idiot. That's the only reason I need." She sneered at him, arms crossed in her usual aloof pose. Her apparent distaste of him convinced those who admired her to dislike him too, so Sakura and Ino avoided him when possible, being big fans of the girl for whatever reason. He'd long since given up on understanding them, and he had better things to do with his time anyway. He decided he'd spend enough time sitting around, and so he picked himself up and began his trek home. He still had a whole week of homework from before break that he needed to finish, and he didn't need another lecture from Iruka like the last time he forgot to do it. He made a mental note to himself to maybe stop waiting until the last minute to do his assignments. "You look like crap, Whiskers," Kira teased, amusement in her voice as she took in his tired appearance. The boy had small bags under his eyes as he leaned tiredly against his desk. "Bite me, Kira." He yawned out. He didn't realize just how long it would take to get all of his work done. He had worked well into the night to complete it all. "Don't think I won't, Whiskers," she replied with her signature fanged grin, getting a concerned sideways glance from the blonde. She had actually bit him before, so he wouldn't put it past her to do so if he pushed her. "How is it you're more of an animal than Akamaru?" Hinata sighed out, shaking her head at her friend's behavior. "I don't know. How do you sit straight with that stick up your butt, princess?" Kira shot back. "When do you plan on taking it out?" Despite her harsh words, there was no real heat in her voice. Having long since grown used to this routine, the two were aware everything was said in jest. Hinata released an unladylike snort at the question. "Why do you ask? Are you hoping I'll let you use it play fetch, perhaps?" She shot back, her face the picture of serenity, as always. "Are you looking for a fight, princess?" The feral girl barked out, rising from her seat. "Why are you three always so noisy?" a tired voice complained from behind them. Naruto tilted his head back and saw the irate face of Shikari glaring down at them. "Well, as much as a sleepy Nara can glare anyway." "Heya, Shika-chan," the blonde greeted, not at all fazed by her irate gaze, offering a small wave to the girl. "I thought I told you not to call me that, you troublesome blonde," she complained, resting her cheek in her palm. "Shika, I'm hurt." The blonde gasped dramatically. "Are you saying you don't like my nickname for you?" His response was an eraser hitting him in the face. "You're so mean to me, Shika-chan." He pouted. "Idiot," she muttered, shaking her head before returning to her nap, her arms acting as a makeshift pillow. "Ano, you shouldn't tease Shikari so much, Naruto. You know she doesn't like it." Choji's voice called out from next to the sleeping girl. The portly boy was happily munching away at his chips as usual. "Ah, it's fine, we all know Shika-chan loves me," he replied with a small grin. Another eraser smacked into the side of his head. "I thought you were sleeping?" he yelled, rounding back on the black-haired girl. She simply flipped him off, not even bothering to raise her head at him. The girl was actually rather vulgar for her age, something he'd quickly found out within days of getting to know her. Amagini had suggested it was due to Nara children maturing a bit quicker than most. They tended to pick up some bad habits early. She reluctantly admitted she had taken to drinking rather early in her teenage years before breaking the habit. Mostly anyway. He could hear Hinata and Kira laughing quietly to themselves at his plight. While Hinata was quiet about it, Kira did nothing to hide her amusement, and was rocking in her chair with mirth. "You are all jerks." The blonde pouted, drawing small circles on his desk with his finger. "I do believe you were warned, Naruto-san. You have no one to blame but yourself." A quiet voice spoke out to his far right. "Thank you for your input, Shino. I really appreciate it." the blonde said, offering a deadpan stare at the bespectacled boy. Shino was a passive member of their group, only occasionally offering his opinions on anything, but when he did it was almost always an opinion buried in logic or dry humor at someone's expense, though he swore that latter bit was never his intention. He didn't believe that one bit. I'm detecting a hint of sarcasm in your voice, Naruto-sen, the boy replied. Naruto just dropped his head onto his desk. Why was he the one being ganged up on? Damn it, he hadn't even started this. This morning couldn't possibly get worse. You might want to stop doing that. I'm not sure you can handle more brain damage, idiot. A smug voice taunted from in front of him. Kami, you sadistic witch. Hi, Satsuki team. He sat up, looking into the scowling face of his rival/enemy. Glad you could be bothered to stop glaring at the wall for a few moments to grace us with your unwanted presence. HN, you should be happy I even bother speaking with you at all. Thankfully stupid is not contagious, or I wouldn't, she said, turning her head away from him. Naruto just rolled his eyes at her response and put his head back down. Maybe he could get a few minutes rest before class started. Good morning, everyone. Please pull out your textbooks and open to page 40. Iruka's chipper voice spoke out as he entered the classroom, grabbing his own book as he prepared for the day's lesson. Naruto could only groan in frustration. Naruto, wake the hell up! Iruka shouted, tossing a piece of chalk at the sleeping boy's head with a level of pinpoint accuracy that could only have come from years of practice. I wasn't sleeping. I was just resting my eyes, the sleepy blonde countered weakly, his face slumped into his folded arms as he tried and failed to look alert. Sure you were. Need I remind you the graduation exam is tomorrow? The scared Chunin lectured. You could at least try and stay awake for this final lesson. Yes, sensei, whatever you say, the whiskered blonde replied, sitting up with a small stretch and a yawn as he readjusted himself in his seat. Iruka rolled his eyes. Having long since grown used to the boy's habits, he knew lecturing him any further would be pointless, so with a huff he turned back to resume his instruction. Naruto gave another small yawn and leaned back into his chair, tuning the man out as his mind wandered to more pressing matters. His graduation exam. It really had been 5 years. 5 long years since he first entered the gates of the academy, and started a new chapter in his life filled with new people and experiences. A lot had changed in those 5 years, he reflected, the most obvious being he'd grown quite a bit, standing now at about 5 foot tall, a little over average for his age, which in his mind was a lot better than being a midget like he had as a young child. His outfit now consisted of a black hoodie with dark orange bands running along the length of the arms, and the famous orange swirl marking that was found throughout the village printed on the back. He wore standard umbu-style black shinobi pants as well, finished off with black open-toed shinobi sandals. Simple but efficient, and also pretty comfy if you asked him. His personality had also changed somewhat. He was a lot calmer now than he'd ever been. Not to say he couldn't still be pretty rowdy when he was excited or training, but he was nowhere near as hyper as before. He wasn't the only one to have changed, however. Most of his classmates had grown up a bit, some more than others. Looking to his left, his eyes caught sight of arguably his closest friend, Hinata. Hinata hadn't changed much personality-wise. She still maintained her kind and gentle demeanor, as she had in their youth, even earning the nickname, the Pale Saint, due to her eye color and patient disposition, garnering the admiration of both teachers and students alike. Of course, those who knew her personally were very much aware that when provoked the young heiress was actually downright terrifying, much more demon than a saint. Hinata now stood at about 4'8", just a little bit shorter than him, and now wore a white kimono-like shirt decorated with the Hyuga clan symbol on her shoulders, and light pink flower petals ran up and down the sleeves. For pants, she went with standard-issue dark blue shinobi pants and blue sandals to finish off her outfit. To his right was his second closest friend, Kira Inuzuka. Kira hadn't changed all that much. She had managed to calm down a little bit, but overall was the same rough and tumble kind of girl she had been as a child. She still loved to fight and was always down for a challenge, often badgering the older students for fights as well. Much to Iruka's annoyance, he might add. Overall, though, she was also pretty fun to just hang out with as well, and the two would wander around outside the village and just talk about whatever was going on in their lives. Granted, those talks usually ended up with them competing in some fashion, but it was the intent that mattered. Kira was still taller than him, much to his annoyance, and her unending satisfaction, standing at a proud 5'2", which she often liked to lord over him, often resting herself against him in a display of what she called alpha dominance. This, of course, often led to even more childish fights between them. Kira, like himself, went for rather simple attire, wearing a gray furred hooded jacket with black pants and sandals. She wasn't big on clothing, and since she often got dirty anyway, she saw no reason to spend lots of time worrying about what she was wearing. Next to her sat Shino. The two weren't super close. The Aburame tendency to keep their distances from others was strong in him, but they got along well enough, and occasionally the two would have little chats about insects, since he would sometimes spot interesting-looking critters during his training and bring them to the boy's attention. An odd friendship, sure, but they made it work just fine. Shino hadn't changed much in appearance other than in height, standing at the same height as himself at an even 5 foot tall. He had ditched his hooded coat a few years back and instead wore a high-collared trench coat that hid the bottom of his face but reveals his hair and eyes. Well, not his eyes so much as his glasses that he refused to take off no matter how much Naruto had begged. One day he'll see under those shades. Moving on and tilting his head back, Naruto looked above him and caught sight of none other than Choji Akimichi. Choji had changed quite a bit from his youth, having grown more confident in himself after their friend group had solidified and he realized they weren't going to mock his weight. He was still a gentle soul, but he was more than capable of taking care of himself now, something that was well known throughout the academy after he'd flattened a few older boys who had called him a fatty. The F word was now strictly forbidden in any conversation involving the boy. The two of them got along well. He'd taken the boy to Ichiraku's shortly after they met, and immediately the portly Akimichi had made the ramen stand a frequent stop when he went out to eat. The two of them would regularly have ramen eating contests, with their current score being 15-14 in his favor. Choji stood at a slightly average 4'10" and was well built, so to speak. He wore a green, short-sleeved haori with a long, white scarf over a light green shirt, and he also wore black shorts and bandages around his legs and forearms. Next to him sat their resident genius, Shikari Nara. Shikari, like Kira, hadn't changed much. Probably because it would be too troublesome in her opinion to do so, she, like most Nara clan members, enjoyed spending her days doing as little as humanly possible and often tried to weasel out of their group hangouts to spend the day resting or cloud watching. To the surprise of almost everyone, the two actually got along very well despite being near complete opposites in regards to personality. Where he was talkative, hyper, and friendly, she was quiet, lazy, and could be rather rude when dealing with people. To their credit, it had only been due to his knowledge of the Nara clan's love of shogi that the girl had even given him a chance. He challenged her to a game after she blew off his previous attempts at friendship, and the two had spent nearly an hour playing a single match before she'd finally beaten him. She'd been impressed and invited him to play again the following day. Now the two played often, sometimes betting small favors or snacks in little wager matches. She also had a habit of teasing him, similar to her library-bound relative, much to his horror and embarrassment. Shikari stood at a little over 4'8", though she always complained that her ponytail should count to make her taller. She joined him and Kira in the Simple Clothes Club, wearing a short-sleeved gray jacket with green-edged sleeves with her clan symbol on its back and a mesh undershirt with bandage wrapping underneath. Turning his attention back to the front of the class, he turned to face the twin fangirls of the academy. First up was Sakura. The pink-haired Haruno had remained fairly consistent over the years. She had grown more confident, but that may have mostly been because of her rivalry with the Yamanaka heiress. Sakura measured out at 4'8", and was garbed in a red chipao dress with short sleeves and with slits along the sides and white circular designs towards the bottom. Under she wore a pair tight dark green bike shorts and blue sandals. She wasn't awful, she was just loud and, as Kira described her, was about as weak as a starving newborn pup. The girl was book smart but didn't apply herself much, coasting by on high test scores rather than putting any real effort to train, sadly. Following her up with Ino Yamanaka. Ino was slightly better, the two having briefly interacted since she was close with Shikari and Choji, but they weren't really friends. The girl was a true gossip at heart, and despite being only a little stronger than Sakura due to her clan techniques, she was rather adept at getting a hold of information. He chalked it up to clan talent, since the Yamanaka clan specialized in information gathering. Ino, similar to Shika and Sakura, stood at an even 4'8", and wore a purple outfit consisting of a high-collared blouse and matching apron skirt along with bandages around her stomach and legs. She was considered one of the prettiest girls in the academy, something she took way too much pride in if you asked him. Lastly, his gaze turned to a brooding figure sitting at the end of the bottom room, gazing darkly out of a nearby window. Satsuki Uchiha. Of everyone in their class, she had probably changed the most. Not that he could fully blame her, of course. It was hard to imagine someone not changing after having their entire family killed, by their own brother no less. The Uchiha massacre had taken place late into their second year of the academy, and shook the village to its core. One of the founding members of the village being almost completely eradicated, barring its sole survivor, and the clan's executioner, caused quite a stir in the village populace. More importantly, it had deeply affected the raven-haired girl, and not for the better. Before the incident, the two had come to understand one another a bit better, and while they would never admit it, both of them had too much pride to do so. They had come to view the other as friends and not just rivals. Satsuki was never the most open person to begin with. Generally only letting her guard down when they were alone training did she seem to relax. Now, though, she was closed off, distant to everyone including him. She would still spar with him, but their bouts held a ferocity that wasn't there previously. She took her losses harder and harshly declined his invitations to join their little group. Satsuki stood just a few inches shorter than him at 4'9" and wore a plain navy blue shirt with the Uchiha fan crest on the back. On her arms were a pair of white armbands that ran the length of her forearms. She wore a pair of white shorts and standard blue sandals. They weren't really on speaking terms nowadays, but he held out some small hope that maybe she'd come around one day, since she didn't cut him out completely like she had her other acquaintances. That was a small positive at least, right? He was broken out of his thoughts by the now familiar sensation of someone lightly brushing their hand against his whisker marks. Seems like he had spaced out again, as Iruka was no longer talking and was instead making his way out of the classroom. "You know, you could just tap my shoulder, Hina-chan," he pointed out. He was not a cat, damn it, he was almost a full-fledged ninja. "You don't pet ninja." "But then I wouldn't get the chance to hear that little purr you do," she replied, a teasing smile on her face as she started packing away her supplies, ignoring his flushed face. "I don't purr, that's slander," he barked out. There was no way he purred, he was a man and men don't purr. "You totally do purr, blondie." Shikari's sleepy voice pointed out, an amused grin situated on her face at his look of sheer betrayal. "That's what you get for being so troublesome. You guys suck." he huffed. I swear I'm gonna go buy a face mask, then we'll see who purrs. Kira gave him a light push, barking with laughter, it'll still be you, Whiskers. Hinata offered him a gentle pat on the shoulder, her lithe form shaking as she tried to suppress her own laughter. I'm sorry, Naruto-kun. If it makes you feel better, I think it's rather cute, she said while hiding her mouth behind her sleeve. He gave them all a deadpan stare before packing his things, doing his best to ignore their laughter as he grumbled to himself about a lack of respect. Hey, Whiskers, are you planning on hitting the training grounds today? Kira asked as she stood up, grabbing her faithful puppy companion and placing him in her hood. Nah, not today. Think I'll just rest up and do some light review for the exam. Don't want to go overboard and risk pulling a muscle or something. Why? He answered, shaking his head. Damn, I was gonna ask you to spar with me again. Nothing like a good fight to calm my nerves before the big day, the feral girl said, shoulders slumping at his answer. You should probably actually study, Kira. You are aware there is a written portion to the exam, and we all know you have the lowest test scores in our group, he replied, giving her a knowing look as she rubbed the back of her head with a slight blush. Shut up, she roared. It's not my fault, it's all so damn boring. Besides, the physical tests should matter more anyway. What good does being super smart do if you go down with one punch? Was that a jab at me? Shikari asked, narrowing her eyes at the Inuzuka. Maybe, the feral girl answered with absolutely no shame in her voice as she stared defiantly back at the irritated Nara. Naruto rubbed the bridge of his nose and sighed as the two began to bicker back and forth. If there was one thing Kira excelled at, it was starting random fights. Hopefully, this didn't get out of hand. Kage main no jutsu. Why Kami, why? After barely managing to stop Shikari from murdering Kira, the group had gone their separate ways, either heading home or out into the village to waste time until it got late. He had decided to skip training and just relax. He had made some stops along the way, grabbing a bite to eat at Ikaraka's before wandering aimlessly around the village. Now he stood on top of the Hokage monument, a rocky mountain that towered above the village, and carved in stone on the side were the faces of all past and present Hokages. The Shodai Hokage, and one of the founders of Konoha, Hashirama Senju, was known as one of the most powerful shinobi to walk the nations. His mere presence could force weaker ninja to flee in terror. Despite his reputation, he was also known to be a kind man who dreamed of creating a more peaceful world. The Naidame Hokage, Tobarama Senju, was the younger brother to the Hashirama, but no less infamous than his older sibling. The man had a mastery of water-style jutsu that put Kiri shinobi to shame. It was rumored that shinobi from Kiri sought him out on the battlefield for that reason. He was a stricter man than his brother, but was brilliant both off and on the battlefield. The Sandaime Hokage, Sarutobi Hiruzen, was the current and acting Kage, having retaken the position after the Kyuubi incident and the untimely death of his successor. Like the Naidame before him, the third was well known for his intelligence, earning the title professor for his knowledge as well as mastery and understanding of almost all ninja arts. It was actually not commonly known that in his prime he was actually considered the strongest Hokage, beating out both the first and second. The last and most recent was none other than the Yandame Hokage, Minato Namikaze. The fourth was almost deified within the village, and not without good reason either. The man had almost single-handedly ended the Third Great Shinobi War and managed to defeat the Kyuubi on his own. He was also the youngest person to be appointed Hokage, which spoke volumes of his skill and ability. Sitting upon the stone heads of the village's greatest heroes, he couldn't help but feel so small in comparison, and it wasn't just the obvious size difference between him and the massive stone faces either. Each of these men had shaped the face of the elemental nations in some way, and yet here he was claiming that one day he'd be stronger than even them, shinobi who were without questions the greatest of their time. If he was honest with himself when he read through all their achievements, their trials, and their victories, he couldn't help but feel inadequate. He wasn't a prodigy, he didn't have any special bloodlines, he didn't come from a well-respected or powerful clan, he was just another face in a crowd, but yet he dared to stand in front of them and proclaim that he would surpass them. There was a fine line between confidence and arrogance, and sometimes he wasn't sure where he fell on that line. He looked out from his seat upon the fourth's head and saw the lights of the village, a beacon in the night as the shopkeepers began to close their stores and the remaining children ran home with stories of their daily adventures. He allowed a soft smile to grace his face as he watched the village from above. The people may have been jerks, that much he wouldn't deny, but, all the same, he still truly loved his home. No matter its faults, there was nothing quite like it. He wondered if that's what drove them, the desire to protect their home, to defend whatever the village had meant to them. I swear I'll surpass all of you, and I promise that I'll keep them safe, he whispered to the stone carvings. Naruto swiftly got up and dusted off his pants. He really should get home before it got too late. He had a test tomorrow after all. He gave one last look out towards the orange glow of the village lights before making his way down, his resolve strengthened. Hiruzen sat tiredly in his chair as he pored over piles of seemingly endless paperwork. Various mission briefings, fund requests, trade disputes, and treaties littered his workspace, all demanding his attention. He often considered why he'd accepted the Kage position in the first place. Then again, declining the final wish of his sensei would have been dishonorable to the man, an insult to the faith he had placed in him, but he could do with just a little less paperwork. He leaned back in his chair, taking a brief moment for himself, allowing his aching hands to rest, and turned his chair outward towards the village. He lamented that in his youth he never truly took the time to admire his home. He was always running about, either training with Tobirama or out on missions, that he rarely got to just look at the village and take it all in. That had changed after his appointment, and he had quickly discovered why the Hokage Tower was built to overlook the village. It was a reminder of what he and every shinobi in Kunoichi fought to protect, what they risked their health, their sanity, and their lives every day to keep safe. It was humbling and terrifying even now to think every choice he made could either maintain their fragile peace or plunge them all back into the fires of war. Hiruzen was a man of peace, but he knew he had more blood on his hands than every ninja in his command. The village was his family, and every day he sent his family to die far from home in the name of protecting it. Few truly understood just what it really meant to be a Kage. To be a Kage was to sacrifice all of oneself in service to their home at any cost. And there was always a cost. He turned to his left and grabbed another file, the Academy records detailing the upcoming list of potential ninja candidates. He scanned through them, making mental notes on interesting or unique profiles before stopping on an image of a familiar blonde, Naruto Uzumaki. His heart ached at the sight of the boy. Kami, how long had it been since he'd last seen him? He wouldn't be surprised if the lad hardly remembered him after all this time. He felt shame at his lack of involvement in the boy's life. He just never seemed to have the time for him. The Kyuubi attack had almost decimated the village. They had lost their Kage, the man who had single-handedly crippled IWA and forced Kumo to surrender. The recent Uchiha massacre had only further weakened the village, and it took all he had to maintain an image of strength to prevent their rivals from trying to capitalize on their weakness. He hated to say it, but there were more pressing matters than one orphan child, even if that child was the hidden son of one of their greatest heroes. The problem was that it wasn't just he who had left the boy. Hiruzen was not ignorant of the general populace's distaste for the lad. His decree that none shall speak of the boy's status as the container was probably all that held them from shouting it from the rooftops. As much as he wished otherwise, he couldn't change how the village felt. For all his skill and power, it was beyond him to control their thoughts, and so the boy suffered not physically, but the aged man had no doubts the boy carried mental scars, wounds harder to heal than any cut or gash. Once again he sighed for what felt like the 100th time and returned the file. Tomorrow a fresh crop of genin would make their way out into the cruel world. He could only hope they proved strong enough to survive the oncoming challenges. Naruto sat anxiously in his seat as he watched his fellow students get called one by one into the examination room and returning minutes later, either proudly displaying their newly acquired headbands or heads shamefully hung, signaling a less than stellar outcome. Already Shino, Choji, Sakura, Hinata, Kira, and Shikari had been called up, each returned with their headbands wrapped somewhere on their bodies. Shino, Kira, and Choji had gone for the traditional headband style, though Choji had added his own unique touch, turning his into a sort of cap with two openings for his hair at the top. Hinata decided to wear hers around her neck, Shikari preferred to wrap it around her arm, and Sakura wore hers like a hairband. Satsuki Uchiha. He watched as the brooding girl made her way into the examination room, completely ignoring her cheering fans wishing her luck. Naruto, you shouldn't stress yourself so much, you'll ruin your appetite, Choji said to his friend as he watched the blonde tap nervously on his desk. Yo Whiskers, you're like the top student here tied with little Miss Emo, what do you have to worry about? Kira added, shaking her head at the boy's behavior. I can't help it, I'm just nervous. I don't want all my work to be for nothing, you know. He replied, his gaze locked onto the exam room door. Troublesome blonde, as if you could actually fail with your insane training. Shikari scoffed as she leaned back into her chair. Now quit your twitching, I can't sleep with you shaking the table. Naruto was going to respond but was cut off by the sound of his name being called. Naruto Uzumaki. Good luck, Naruto-kun. Hinata gave him a soft cheer as she watched him make his way towards the exam room, the rest of his friends following suit, offering words or gestures of encouragement. He acknowledged them with a nod before stepping into the room and taking his place at the center. Across from him sat Irika and a mysterious white-haired Chunin he'd never seen before, though he didn't like the look in the man's eyes. It reminded him of the villagers, which set him slightly on edge. Irika, noticing the boy's gaze, quickly introduced the stranger. Naruto, this is my assistant Mizuki, he said, gesturing towards the now revealed Mizuki. He normally teaches the younger students, but since they have the day off, he asked to watch your group. I see. Hello Mizuki-sensei, pleased to meet you, he said, giving a small bow. He might not like the man, but he would be polite for now, seeing as it wouldn't help him to rude at the moment. It's a pleasure to meet you as well, Naruto-kun. Best of luck with your test. The man replied, returning the bow, though Naruto did catch the slight twitch in lips as he said his name. He didn't like this man at all. Turning his attention back to Irika, he awaited his instructions. You've done well in all the previous tests, you scored almost perfectly on the written exam, and your skill in taijutsu is impressive as always. For your last test, you'll need to demonstrate proficiency in the 3 basic academy techniques: the transformation, replacement, and clone techniques. Naruto frowned slightly at the mention of the clone technique. He had always struggled to pull that one off due to his large reserves, but he had a workaround. He just hopped it didn't disqualify him. Running through hand signs, he gathered his chakra and, envisioning the third Hokage, called out his technique. Henj no Jutsu. A cloud of smoke enveloped him before quickly dispersing, leaving in his place a replica of the aged Hokage, pipe and all, standing before his instructor. Very good. And I see you were paying attention when I mentioned the third enjoys smoking. It seems you don't sleep through all my lessons, the scared man joked. In another cloud of smoke, the whiskered blonde reappeared, dropping the technique while rubbing the back of his head sheepishly. Next, the replacement technique if you would. Iruka prompted him to the tool to his left. Please switch places with the stool. Naruto nodded and once again ran through the proper seals before calling out the second jutsu. Kawarimi no jutsu. Naruto felt a familiar tugging sensation of the technique as his body swapped places with the stool before casting it once again and swapping back. Perfect, now just perform the clone technique and summon at least 3 clones and you'll pass, Iruka said. Naruto took a deep breath and performed the hand signs and called out the last jutsu. Bunshin no jutsu. Immediately smoke filled the room as 10 copies of the blonde crowded the examination room, each one offering a sheepish grin at the deadpan look on their sensei's face. Were 10 clones necessary, Naruto? The scar-faced man questioned, waving the remaining smoke out of his face. Sorry, sensei. I have too much chakra to make less than that, but I promise I'm still working on my chakra control, he explained, and it was true, he practiced daily. It was the only reason he could make them at all. Well, there are no rules about overachieving, so congratulations, Naruto. It is my honor to present you with official Konoha forehead protector. Iruka smiled at his student and handed him a standard blue headband. May you wear it with pride. Naruto accepted the item with a large grin and bowed to his sensei in thanks. Naruto offered the man a small thank you and a smaller bow before making his way out of the testing room while wrapping the symbol of his village around his left arm.